story begins with Ji writing to his friend Sun Min, asking to borrow some money. Sun Min asked what he had done this time. He replied that he had hit the director's grandson, which is why he had been expelled. His parents were furious and restricted his spending. Maybe he could help him. He would pay it all back. Sun Min wrote that next time he should think before he acts. Shen An replied that he had no other choice. He was being harassed by the girls in his group. His friend asked him not to hit anyone else and wrote that he had transferred money to him and that he should not forget to go to the hospital. After accepting 4,000 wen, the main character leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said that it was good that he had Sun Ming. Otherwise, he would be in trouble. His phone notified him of a new message, and he looked at the screen, thinking it was probably another payment reminder. But contrary to expectations, it turned out to be a notification that Jojo wanted to add him as a friend. He was surprised and exclaimed, "Isn't she the hottest internet star?" He accepted the request and immediately asked if it was Jojo herself. But the person who added him was just a fan of hers, and his name was Shanna. Because of this, the main character threw his phone on the bed in a rage and exclaimed, "What kind of joke is this?" He wrote that it was such a coincidence that they even had the same name. Shannon replied that they were the same person, only he was from the future, 10 years ahead. He was also an illegitimate child and a poor man. He was here to help him get rich and climb to the top of the world, so he should believe him. He should go downstairs because in 10 minutes there would be an earthquake. Gigi was surprised that he knew he was illegitimate and thought that he had not told anyone about it. He still didn't believe him and decided not to think about it, then went to eat at his favorite little shop. Sitting down at a table on the street, he asked the owner to add more cilantro, and while he was waiting, he noticed that the glass of water on the table began to shake. He felt this tremor throughout his body and suddenly remembered Shen's words about the earthquake. He immediately took out his phone and thought that the man had said the earthquake would start in 10 minutes. He checked the time on his phone, then heard a noise behind him. He turned around and saw that parts of some houses had fallen off and were starting to fall down. The shop owner trembled with fear, and the main character realized that the guy wasn't lying. He immediately wrote to him about it and asked how he knew about it. The man replied that he had told him so, that they were the same person, only he was from the future. The earthquake that had just occurred was caused by the expansion of the plates due to Yuan Yang's awakening. In 18 days, the world would undergo great changes, so he should take advantage of this opportunity, otherwise he would die in 10 years. He was not deceiving him. Tonight, Yuan Yang would have his first chance to break free, but no one knew about it yet. Early in the morning, let him go to Chanling Mountain in the western suburbs. To the north, there will be a small lake, from the center of which amazing aromas will emanate. This is Yuan Yang. He will understand everything immediately. He needs to sit by the lake, not moving a meter away, absorbing the fragrant air, and under no circumstances should he delay. Climbing the stairs, he was out of breath and said that he seemed to have gone completely mad, coming here on the advice of some eccentric. And where was he supposed to find a lake here? He stopped to catch his breath, and looking at the sky, said that he would have been better off watching the moon. At that moment, sirens could be heard from the road. Several police cars drove up to the source of the earthquake, and a female police officer named Bai Weiwei got out of the car, ordered the first group to block the entrance to the mountain and the second to follow her. No unauthorized persons were allowed to pass. The main character, hiding behind a rock, cautiously peeked out and thought, "What is the police doing here? Could something really be happening today?" But that didn't matter. He needed to check everything himself. He headed further towards the lake and, lighting his way with a flashlight, remembered exactly where it was located, and seeing the water ahead, said that it must be here. He took off his backpack and said that fortunately, he had turned back in time and didn't have to deal with the police. Of course, it didn't really look like a lake, but at least there was water here. He sat down and touched the water, suddenly smelling a fragrance, and asked, "Could this be Yuan Yang?" The lake began to emit even stronger aromas, and he wrote to his future self asking, "What is this anyway?" If he was from the future, was he alive or dead? Future Shannon replied that Yuan Yang was a great thing that people would have to practice after 18 days of great changes. As for him, he was dead. During his ascension, he had been betrayed, and his soul was trapped in the void, so he could only send messages, nothing more. His energy was insufficient, so let him remember his words. The release of Yuan Yang is a harbinger of the great changes that will occur in 18 days. When he consumes everything, he will contact him again. So let him take advantage of this opportunity. The protagonist thought, what ascension and what yuan yang? What is going on here? He noticed that the lake had grown larger and cursed loudly, asking what had happened. Wasn't there just a small puddle here? He walked to the very edge and looked at the bottom, saying that he had never seen anything like it before. After that, he sat down and concentrated, deciding to follow the advice of his future self. Absorbing the aroma, he absorbed various skills. B-rank absorption, S-rank space was one pure ceremony, and the hidden skill of future S-rank fusion. As soon as everything was complete, his space absorption skills activated, and at that moment, someone interrupted his meditation, loudly asking what he was doing there. The main character fell into the water in surprise and was very frightened, saying that he could not swim, and the police officer shone a flashlight on him and told him not to move, that they would pull him out now. At that moment, the protagonist's absorption skill was activated, and the police officers began to be sucked away, after which he received 1,000 experience points and somehow found himself on dry land, and soon lost consciousness. He found himself in the middle of a white void and looked around, wondering where he was. In the middle of the void, he noticed a small waterfall and a lake, and as he approached, he said that it was exactly the same as on the mountain. He scooped up some water with his hands, drank it, and suddenly the system announced that he had gained 10 skill points. He asked in surprise, "What is this? Some kind of cheat?" He immediately began splashing water on himself, adding 1,000 skill points, and asked, "Am I really going to become the main character?" The guy laughed loudly with joy, and splashing water on his face again, reclined and said that after 20 years of unhappy life, he finally deserved something good. He opened the status window and asked, "But why does he need these skill points?" In the window, he saw all the information about himself. He was 20 years old, had 3 skills, and 15,000 points. Among the 3 skills, he noticed a hidden one and thought, what is this connection to the future? So, with this, he could contact himself from the future? Maybe it would help him figure everything out. He clicked on the system window, thinking that he should try it himself first, and suddenly felt a jolt, and exclaimed, "Where did that earthquake come from?" He was pushed out of this white space and woke up. Opening his eyes, he grabbed his head and asked, "What happened?" Wei Wei crossed her arms over her chest and asked suspiciously, "Who the hell is he? Why did he come here?" Seeing such a beauty in front of him immediately after waking up, he began to drool over her. But suddenly she approached him sharply, pointed her finger at him, and exclaimed that they had cordoned off the entire mountain. How did he get here? He laughed nervously and said that there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Feverishly thinking of an answer, he looked around, and his gaze fell on the backpack, and he pointed at it, saying that he had simply decided to go hiking. She snorted and thought that, apparently, he had decided to lie until the very end. She said that despite everything, she couldn't just let him go. He waved his hands nervously and said that he had indeed just decided to go hiking, and then carelessly fell into the lake. He couldn't swim, but their people helped him. She asked in surprise, "Did he see the lake?" He confirmed her words and said it was huge. He pointed to the side and said that the lake was right there, and she should see for herself if she didn't believe him. He himself looked in the direction of the lake, but seeing no trace of water, asked in surprise, "Where did it go?" Noticing the woman's gloomy gaze, he became anxious and asked her to believe him. Just a moment ago, there had been a lake here, exuding a wonderful aroma. He thought it was all over, and then Wei Wei ordered her people to take him away, and they obeyed. After a while, they were already driving back to the city, and Wei Wei wasted no time in filling out the report. She asked his name, and he told her that he was 20 years old and had had to drop out of school. She asked why he had done so. He looked out the window and replied that he was too poor to pay. She asked if he couldn't cover the cost of his studies, but found the money for the trip. He laughed nervously and replied that he just wanted a change of scenery. She looked into his backpack and said that he had prepared rather superficially for this trip. Shannon sighed with relief and thought that he knew nothing good would come of this. Fortunately, there was nothing here that could confirm his intentions. This sigh did not escape Wei Wei's gaze, and she looked at him suspiciously, thinking, "Is this guy hiding something?" She immediately took out her gun and pointed it at him, telling him not to move. Let him tell the truth about what he was doing here. He almost jumped in fear and asked her not to do that. He would tell her everything. She smiled slightly and pointed to the badge on her cap, telling him not to dare lie to her again. Everyone had to follow the rules. He looked at her badge and, seeing the E0 logo there, he became very nervous and thought that this girl was not wearing a police cap. Who was she anyway? He replied that he would tell her everything, but she should tell him first. The girl replied that he was brave to ask questions himself. But luck was not on his side now. She had the gun. After a while, the main character finally found himself at home. He threw his backpack on the sofa and sat down next to it, saying he was so tired. He didn't expect things to turn out this way. He looked at the business card she had given him and said that her position was not indicated on it, which was strange. What did she do for a living? He remembered how she had put a gun to his head and asked threateningly if he really wanted to die. The memory made him shudder, and he told himself to forget about it and that he'd better sit on the internet to distract himself. He went outside and went to a gaming club where he took a seat. While browsing the news online, he noticed several interesting articles about a volcanic eruption and a mysterious incident in Bay City, where a skyscraper had disappeared without a trace. He said it was strange. Apparently unusual things were happening not only on this mountain. He continued browsing the news and sighed heavily, wondering what his future self had said. The world would change dramatically in 18 days. Could all of this be true? He leaned back in his chair and thought about what to do next. Although he had done as he was asked, there was no mention of what would happen next. Besides, he still hadn't figured out the situation with Yuan Yang. He picked up the phone from the table and decided he would deal with problems as they arose. He opened a conversation with his friend, who had been texting him about the earthquakes and looking for him. Shenyan wrote back that he was fine and thought he should look for a place to stay. Maybe he should stay with his father? Sun Ming asked if he was dead. Gigi exclaimed that he wasn't saying anything nice to him at all. Gigi sighed and thought that only he could help him now. And his friend wrote to him that his house was probably destroyed. The main character put down his phone and opened the search bar, thinking that if it weren't for what had happened, there would be no problems. He typed the name of the organization from Wei Wei's badge into the search bar and thought that she looked like a police officer. But in fact, it was not. The position was not specified, but the badge said E0. Maybe it was some kind of special department. He remembered that before she dropped him off at his house, Wei Wei handed him a document and asked him to write his first and last name, as well as his address and contact number. When he didn't see any results for his search query, he cursed loudly and said he couldn't find anything. What does she do anyway? Meanwhile, at the E0 surveillance center, the man who was watching Shengnan through the CCTV camera turned to Wei Wei and said that this guy was constantly reading news about unusual incidents and their logo. Should he limit his internet search? She told him not to scare him. He wouldn't find anything anyway. Let him continue watching. She didn't believe he was there by accident. After a while, the main character's friend came to pick him up. Leaving the gaming club, he waved to him and said he was here, then put his arm around his shoulder and thanked him for coming to pick him up. Sun Ming disgustedly removed his arm from his shoulder and said discontentedly that he had just moved into a new house and hadn't even had time to bring his girlfriend over yet, so he shouldn't dare to mess things up there. Gigi walked over to the passenger door and told him not to worry. After all, he had to live like this because of his family. He wouldn't make a mess in his bedroom. His friend sighed nervously, and they set off. Shayna looked out the window and thought that since the girl knew his address, it wasn't safe to stay there. It seemed that for now he would have to stay with Sun Min. After a while, they arrived at his house, and as soon as Gigi entered, he looked around with delight. He said that, of course, he knew that he wasn't poor, but he didn't think it was this good. While he was looking around, Sun Ming went to the refrigerator and threw him a bottle of soda, telling him not to break anything and to find a job. Shannon deftly caught the bottle and replied with a smile that he understood everything and was very grateful to him. It was time to go to bed. Gigi lay down on the bed and opened the system window, saying that he still hadn't had a chance to study it, and he thought it was time to do so. He opened the skills window and clicked on absorption, activating it, and suddenly felt his body begin to rise along with the bed. He turned around and saw a whirlwind of energy behind him, exclaiming, "What's going on?" He quickly descended to the floor and watched as the portal absorbed the bed, frozen in surprise. At that moment, his friend entered the room and said he had brought him his pajamas. He wanted to say something else, but froze in place when he saw the empty room. He immediately grabbed his friend by the clothes and exclaimed, "What did you do with my bed? Where did you put such a huge thing?" Not knowing how to explain what had happened, Shannon looked away and became nervous. then asked if maybe he had just forgotten to put it back. Sun Ming gritted his teeth in anger and told him not to mess with him. That bed had cost 32,000. Gigi told him to think for himself. How long had he lived here since buying it? Maybe he just forgot. The hero looked into his friend's face. Sun Ming suddenly realized that this was possible and asked if he meant that this was his first night in this house too. He headed for the door and scratched the back of his head in confusion, saying that he must have confused it with another house. He left the room and the main character sighed with relief, thinking he was saved. But suddenly Sun Ming returned and threw open the door, saying that he would have to sleep on the floor tonight. They would solve the bed problem tomorrow. After that, they went to bed, and soon morning came. It was around 8 a.m. The protagonist was awakened by the sound of a notification coming from his phone. He opened his eyes and sleepily picked up his phone, wondering who the hell was texting him so early in the morning. But when he saw the sender's name, his sleepiness immediately disappeared, and he exclaimed that it was him. Future Shayna asked if he believed him now. Had he consumed what he had asked him to and awakened his abilities? Gigi confirmed his words and replied that he definitely believed him. His body had changed after he absorbed Wen Yang. His abilities had awakened, but he did not yet fully understand how to use them. The future him asked him to tell him more about it, and some time passed. Still waiting for an answer, Shannon thought, why has he been ignoring him for half a day? He wrote to him and asked, what's the matter? Are his abilities useless? His future self laughed and replied that this was not the case at all. He replied that he did not understand everything yet, but these were clearly not useless skills. He should not get excited prematurely, but rather tell him about last night. Gigi got angry, and his future self wrote that Wei Wei was a person who had awakened her abilities very early on, but at that time, she had not yet acquired them. But the day after tomorrow, unknown forces would attack her at the estate, and she would stop bullets with her bare hands. The main character's eyes lit up with excitement, and he asked, is she really that strong? Let her say whether she will become his wife. The future Shannon was silent and then wondered, does that mean I was so stupid in the past? He wrote that even though they were the same person, many events had already changed course since they had made contact. But some significant events, such as Yuan Yang's distribution, would not change. Let him remember that in half a month, global changes would occur. By the time his energy is restored, he should already be stronger. If he falls behind even one step, he will most likely repeat his fate. Gigi told him not to worry. With his help, he would surely succeed. Shannon from the future snorted, and putting down the phone continued to sit in the void and mentally told him not to die there again. At that moment, the main character put down his phone and lay down on the mattress, thinking that in just 17 days the world would change dramatically. He stood up abruptly and thought that if his future self was right, then he needed to take every chance he could. That was all clear, but what exactly should he do? He remembered that he had told him about Wei Wei and thought that maybe something would happen in the northern suburbs the day after tomorrow. For example, another Yuan Yang outbreak. He got up from the mattress and put on his shoes, thinking that he would find out everything later anyway. Now it was time to fill his stomach. After that, he went to the nearest restaurant and started eating, but was distracted by the sound of a notification. He picked up his phone and thought, is this another message from himself? He saw a notification that the beautiful JoJo was live and clicked on it, going to her broadcast. She greeted all her viewers and said that she would now perform a cute song for them called Spring Drizzle. After listening to her for a while, Shannon thought she sang quite well. She continued to sing for them. People in the chat wrote that she had such a beautiful voice. One of her biggest fans sent her some sparkles, and Shannon was very surprised, exclaiming, isn't anyone ashamed? Jodo read the message in the chat and said that it seemed like they wanted more, and she would like that too. They decided to switch to the broadcast of a user with the nickname 564241, who had recently sent her sparkles, and Gigi followed their example. On the live stream, he saw this guy breathing fire out of his mouth, and viewers wrote that it was much more interesting than songs. Does he have some kind of ability? The main character thought that it didn't look like he had been drinking anything before that. Had he awakened his powers too? Suddenly, the broadcast was interrupted, and he exclaimed, what happened? After finishing his meal, he left the restaurant and noticed a crowd of people near a burning house. He wondered when the fire had started. He hoped everything was okay. One floor of the house was burning brightly, and the fire had spread to another floor. While everyone was rushing to escape the fire, Schengen ran in the opposite direction, thinking that something was wrong. He could feel the energy of Yuan Yang here. Apparently, a room had caught fire, which is why the broadcast was interrupted. He needed to check everything. He ran up to the burning building and looked around, feeling that the energy was stronger here. He followed the trail and reached an alley, thinking that the energy was fading here. Running his hand along the wall, he felt moisture and realized it was blood, thinking that the marks on the wall were fresh. The guy from the live broadcast must be somewhere around here. He continued walking, looking around at the same time, but he didn't notice that someone was watching him. A silhouette appeared from around the corner behind him, and gritting his teeth, ran out of his hiding place and, stretching out his arm, shot a jet of hot flame at the protagonist. Fortunately, the main character managed to react in time and dodged slightly to the side so the flame did not touch him. He saw a wounded and exhausted young man in front of him and realized that he was the one who had been broadcasting. Clutching his wound, he looked at him and asked if he also wanted to catch him. He said his name was Su Yuan and that he wasn't going anywhere. Dripping with cold sweat, he looked expectantly at the guy in front of him, and Shannon thought that it was really him. Not much time had passed since the broadcast was interrupted. Where did these injuries come from? He raised his hands, showing that he was not going to harm him, and said that he had misunderstood, that he was not here for that at all. Su Yuan leaned against the wall, barely able to stand, and asked if he meant to say that he wasn't with them. He started talking about yesterday's earthquake, and Shannon said he already knew about it. Right now, he was most interested in where he had been at that moment. Su Yun's face darkened, and he was about to tell him what he had been doing yesterday. But suddenly, they both noticed someone's presence on the roof nearby and realized they were being watched. Immediately, the two men jumped into the alley, and their cloaks lifted slightly, revealing the weapons and grenades hidden inside. Seeing this, Gigi and Su Yuan cursed simultaneously. Then the men looked around with smirks and pointed their guns at them, then opened fire. Miraculously dodging the bullets, they managed to hide around the corner, and Shannon began to observe the men, thinking that they did not look like police officers, but rather like terrorists. It was strange. Why were they chasing him? He looked towards Su Yuan to ask him about it, but when he didn't see him, he exclaimed, "Where did he go?" He could have at least warned him about this. He peeked around the corner and nervously waved his hand at the terrorists, asking them not to shoot. He wasn't the one they were looking for. Maybe they would just let him go. It was a foolish move. The men didn't care and opened fire again. The protagonist managed to hide around the corner in time and then ran, covering his head from the bullets flying at him, and said he was just passing by. One of the men stopped and said that this guy was just running away. It seemed that he really was an ordinary person. His partner put his hand on his gun and asked if he was sure he was really ordinary. They reached the shelter where Schengen was hiding, and the man pointed his gun at him and told him to put his hands behind his head and come out slowly. He replied that he understood, but asked him not to shoot. While one of the men handcuffed him to a pipe, his partner pointed his gun at him and told him to tell the truth, or he would kill him. If he tried to escape again, he would at least shoot him in the leg. Gigi became nervous and thought that if he had known earlier, he would never have come here. After that, they left him and went upstairs, and he sighed with relief and said that he was safe for now. Suddenly, his phone rang, and he dropped his hands sharply, then jumped up, and the phone fell out of his pocket, but he managed to catch it. Landing on his feet, he looked at the notification and said it was another message from him. Future Shayna wrote to him that he had forgotten to say something. He should not trust anyone except the special department. The main character laughed nervously and said that he was a little late in writing about it. He asked why he hadn't told him about it earlier. Some guys had just chased him, and now he was in handcuffs. What should he do now? The other told him not to worry. He would send him something, so he should remember it well and try to reproduce it. It was a set of exercises and breathing techniques. Initially, he wanted to wait until the other guy absorbed the energy a second time, but it looked like he would have to speed things up. Let him remember he had to protect himself. After that, Gigi began to perform the set of exercises and breathing techniques, and concentrating, was able to pull his hands out of the handcuffs. Feeling a surge of energy in his body, he thought he had become much stronger, which was cool. To test it, he punched the nearest wall, and particles of plaster flew in all directions. Shannon from the future asked how he was feeling now. He replied that everything was fine. He was full of strength. At that moment, the men came down from the second floor, and one of them said that the kid had escaped. How were they going to explain this now? His partner asked him to be quiet, and noticing that Shannon was holding a phone, said that he was a complete idiot, even managing to play with his phone. Angered, he approached him, pointed a gun at the back of his head, and said that he had upset them greatly. Why not help them let off some steam? Just as the man was about to pull the trigger, Gigi frowned and turned sharply, knocking the gun out of his hands with force. The man realized that he had deceived them and told his partner to kill him, after which they both opened fire. But the main character jumped up, dodging the bullets. Clearly unwilling to let him go, they continued to shoot, and he, dodging the bullet once again, nervously clenched his teeth and thought that the situation was not entirely favorable. The fire was too dense. Realizing he had no choice, he spread his arms and activated his absorption skill, causing a huge portal to appear in front of him, and then he activated his space skill. Because of this, the bullets began to be sucked into the portal and disappeared. This also affected the men, who, feeling themselves being sucked in, began to run away. Due to the prolonged use of his skills, Shannon was covered in sweat and wondered why it was so difficult for him. The men escaped the area affected by his skill, and one of them told his partner to run as the portal was growing. They knew nothing about this guy and his abilities, so they needed to go back and report everything. After they left, the protagonist deactivated his skills and, having lost all his strength, grabbed his head and staggered, then lost consciousness and fell. Dropping his head and phone on the floor, an hour passed. He finally woke up and, looking at his phone, said that he had been unconscious all this time. He wrote to his future self that he had just regained consciousness after losing it. What had happened? His future self replied that he had used up too much energy, so he should just wait a little while. He didn't have enough strength to use his skills often yet, so he should use them wisely. Shannon asked what he should do. Tomorrow he still had to absorb Yuan Yang. The other replied that it was fine. The absorption did not consume his energy, so he could relax. By the way, what about those pursuers? Gigi replied that there were two of them, but they had escaped. Future Shannon told him to be on his guard, as they would find him again soon. He had to kill them. He had to remember that the world had already changed. He had to cast aside his fears and weaknesses, otherwise he simply wouldn't be able to survive. After reading the message, he looked sadly at the floor and thought that, of course, in the end, he knew himself better than anyone else. He knows how soft-hearted he is. Deciding not to be discouraged, he stood up and said enthusiastically that he would overcome any difficulties in the future, he promised. From now on, he would not be afraid of anything in this world. But he didn't know that he wasn't alone now. Su Yuan, hiding around the corner, contacted Mrs. Jin, and she asked, "Is this the man he was talking about? He's quite interesting." He thanked her for saving his life and asked if she was really interested in him. She asked him to continue watching him. If this guy was really strong, they would have to invite him to join the team. At that moment, Shannon left the building and turned around suspiciously, wondering why he felt so strongly that someone was watching him. But as soon as he thought that, a bat flashed behind him, and the stranger hit him on the head, knocking him unconscious. When he came to, he immediately felt pain, and seeing that he was tied up, asked what was going on. His eyes suddenly widened in surprise, because Wei Wei was standing in front of him. She smiled, pulled on the rope, and asked if he could explain where he had been at noon today. He replied that he didn't think it was any of her business. Why should he have to answer to her? He just had a stomach ache. Unexpectedly, he moved closer to her and asked with a smile if she had fallen in love with him, because she couldn't leave him alone. Her face flushed slightly, and she untied the ropes on him, turned away, and told him not to talk nonsense. Let him be careful. She would surely catch him making a mistake soon. He shrugged his shoulders and replied that he would be more careful then. He approached her and smiled, asking her to tell him if anything happened, and she replied that it would be better if he didn't know anything. She asked, "By the way, has anyone asked him to go to Mount Qianling?" He shrugged and shook his head in response, and she said that if he met that person, he should tell her immediately. After such a turbulent day, Gigi finally returned home and sat down on the floor, saying that she was so complicated. He closed his eyes and concentrated, entering another space. Around him, he saw a swallowed bed, a strange space like in a dream, and several types of weapons. Noticing a gun in the pile of things on the ground, he picked it up and looked at his reflection in the water, thinking about how his body felt while he was in this space. Meanwhile, he simply slept sitting up. Gigi looked at the gun in his hand and wondered. Since he could absorb objects by moving them into this space, could he also retrieve them? He decided to try. And returning to the real world, a drop appeared. He had summoned water from the lake inside the space and said with delight that he had succeeded. He poured the water into a bottle and set it aside, deciding to study it another time. He stood up and put his hands behind his head, saying that now he should return the bed to Sun Min. The moment he had just put the bed back in its place, his friend entered the room, and Shannon looked at him in horror. Fortunately, Sun Min didn't suspect anything and entered the room, smiling and asking if he had bought a new bed. He scratched the back of his head and nervously replied that he had just ordered it on Taobao. Suddenly, Sun Ming noticed a bottle of water on the table and exclaimed, "What is this? Some new kind of soda!" He picked up the bottle and opened it, saying that he was a good guy for knowing what he liked. Shannon tried to stop him, but he had already taken a few sips, and Gigi asked why he was drinking without looking. Sun Ming didn't answer and asked why it tasted so strange. Suddenly, he doubled over, and his whole body was covered in cold sweat, causing him to grit his teeth and say that he felt sick. He immediately rushed to the bathroom, and the main character supported him, and then hid the bottle of water away, and thought that Sun Ming had had enough for today. He wondered if ordinary people could drink this at all. While his friend was suffering in the bathroom, he sat down on the floor and decided to practice a little. He closed his eyes and concentrated, beginning to exude energy. The mysterious girl who had been watching him all this time noticed this and said that it was tiger breathing, a technique preserved from ancient martial arts. This man seemed unusual, but unfortunately, the technique was incomplete. After a while, Sun Ming finally came out of the bathroom and told his friend that he had even passed out. What was in that bottle? Gigi became concerned and asked if he was feeling better. Maybe he should see a doctor. He replied that he just needed to rest for the evening and he would feel better. Hearing that everything was fine, Shannon breathed a sigh of relief and said that was great. After a while, he went to the estate in the western suburbs, and the guards on the road stopped him, saying that outsiders were not allowed to enter. He said he was leaving, noticing the surveillance cameras everywhere. He turned around and thought with a dissatisfied look on his face that the security at the estate in the western suburbs was quite strict. Following the instructions of the future Shenyang, he entered the forest and found himself on the other side of the estate, thinking that, fortunately, he had told him how to get around the cameras. Touching the fence, he easily tore through the mesh and began to climb inside, thinking he had heard that there were many wild animals here. He wondered if this was true. There was a sign near the fence warning that it was a dangerous area, but he didn't notice it. The future Shengan asked if he was already there. There were about 10 minutes left before the start. Soon chaos would break out on the estate, and then Yuan Yang would appear. He couldn't miss it. After reading this, Gigi thought that this time it would not be a lake. While he was thinking about it, a wolf passed through the fence and growled loudly, which made the main character nervous. He turned around in fear and decided it was time to run, but suddenly stopped and thought that this was not the best option. If he started running, the wolf would definitely chase after him, and it would be useless. He swallowed nervously and thought that these rich people had such strange hobbies. Who would even think of keeping such animals? The wolf continued to approach, and he wondered what to do now. This beast looks rather strange. He noticed that the wolf had unnaturally red eyes, and then the beast suddenly lunged at him, and he ran into the forest thinking it was too fast. Noticing a tree ahead, he decided to take advantage of it, and running up close to it, he jumped up sharply, and the wolf crashed headfirst into the trunk. The main character landed behind the wolf and noticed blood splattered on the tree trunk, and the beast was no longer moving. He decided to use his absorption skill to clean up after himself. Otherwise, God forbid, someone might notice. Shannon looked at the time on his phone and thought that there were only 5 minutes left, so he had to hurry. At that moment, the ground beneath his feet shook, and he rushed to the nearest tree, cursing the earthquake. He grabbed the tree trunk with his hands and began to climb up, wondering if everything would be all right if he climbed that high. He sat down on a branch and noticed a large group of people near the estate. Among them was Wei Wei, who was asking the panicking crowd to calm down. He wondered if he was seeing her again. The earthquake intensified, and she felt it, so she took out a megaphone and told people not to panic. Then she turned to her subordinates and told them to stay there, and if anyone refused to obey orders, they should act according to the rules. Shannon thought there were quite a lot of people here. It was strange. How did they find out about this place? He remembered his last meeting with her, and closed his eyes, sighing heavily. Then took the monkey mask out of his backpack and thought that it would be better not to cross paths with her, otherwise he would never get rid of her. A message came to his phone, and he wrote to his future self that there was an earthquake here, just like last time. What was going on? His future self told him not to worry, that it was a sign of Yuan Yang's awakening. The stronger the earthquake, the closer Yuan Yang was, so he needed to prepare to absorb that energy. He replied that he understood, then put on his mask and, feeling the tremors intensify, exclaimed in surprise, "Is it already activating?" Tree roots appeared from under the ground, and someone exclaimed, "What's going on?" Wei Wei turned around and looked at the roots in shock, while the main character jumped down and, tapping the roots, realized that they were iron. He sat down next to them and activated his absorption and space skills, sucking up all the energy around him, and the system reported that he had gained 3,000 potential points. After that, he moved to his space, and hugging the iron roots, happily said that he had succeeded. But when did he manage to absorb the iron tree? Only 10 minutes had passed. He looked around and thought, it's more spacious here than last time, right? Did absorbing Yuan Yang really expand the space available to him? And what about his skills? He opened the system window and saw that he had 32,000 points available. He wanted to try to improve his B-rank absorption skill and ordered the system to do so. After that, it reported that the absorption skill had been improved and the rank had been upgraded from B to A. He could use another 22,000 points to improve his skills. He was very happy that he had succeeded, but meanwhile in the real world, he was discovered. One of Wei Wei's subordinates pointed at him and told her to look. She turned around and saw a man sitting on the ground who hadn't noticed them. So she ordered the others to continue cordoning off the perimeter while she went to take a closer look. But as soon as she took a step, she accidentally bumped her shoulder against some sharp roots and cut herself. She looked at the wound, and her subordinate asked if she should treat it first. The girl wiped the blood with a handkerchief and replied that everything was fine and that they should continue to drive people away. They obeyed the order, and she, removing the bloody handkerchief from her shoulder, noticed that her wound had disappeared and was very surprised by this turn of events. Suddenly, 2 loud shots rang out, and the bullets flew forward, one of them piercing the head of a Special Forces soldier. The main character immediately came to his senses and exclaimed, "What's going on here?" He noticed that the second bullet was flying straight at Wei Wei and told her to be careful, which made her immediately pay attention to him and get scared when she saw him. She wanted to dodge but didn't have time, and the bullet flew straight into her palm but did not cause any injuries. Her subordinates asked in surprise, "Did she really stop it?" She was in shock at the time and didn't understand what had just happened. She opened her palm and, looking at the bullet, wondered if she had stopped it with her bare hands. Suddenly, a loud, frightened scream came from the direction of the main character. He quickly crawled to the side, and the people who had been shooting at them came out of cover, and the Special Forces immediately put up their shields. After a while, Wei Wei began to examine their corpses and said that it was strange. Some of them had committed suicide, but there were no clues yet. It looked like the work of hitmen. Perhaps these people had been sent by some organization. One of her subordinates grabbed Sheng and asked what to do with him. She turned her attention to him and asked who had told him to come here. The main character trembled and said that his legs were numb. The captain asked to let him go, but her subordinates said they still hadn't established his identity. After receiving the order, the soldiers immediately released the man. But suddenly he stood up and fell face down on the woman's chest. The man was outraged and exclaimed, "Does he want to die?" Shannon looked up at Wei Wei and apologized to her, saying it was not intentional. She was embarrassed and told him to get out of there. The soldier suddenly moved forward, intending to grab him, but Gigi kicked him and threw him aside, and then said that he was just impulsive. After all, how could anyone resist such beauty? Wei Wei looked at him in surprise and thought that this guy was strong, and her subordinates aimed their weapons at him. She told them not to come any closer, that she would deal with him herself, then swung her leg to kick him, but the main character grabbed her ankle, and releasing energy from his hands said that she was not strong enough. She got angry and kicked again, but he blocked it and then said that her agility and speed were also not enough. The girl wrapped her legs around him and grabbed his arm, but he quickly broke free and grabbed her legs, asking if she thought she could trap him. She gritted her teeth and cursed silently, after which he threw her aside and one of the fighters rushed to her aid. When she fell to the ground, there was an explosion and dust rose, and when it settled, she looked at the fleeing guy and punched the ground, saying she would get him soon. Her subordinate almost died after such a blow and told her that he felt sick. She turned around and thought, what is this feeling? It was as if her strength had increased. Could it really be thanks to him? Shannon, meanwhile, was running through the forest, saying that she was not bad, and he hoped that this strength would be useful to her. He suddenly noticed a white snake slithering next to him and exclaimed that it was huge. Then a wild boar rushed past him from the other side, and he jumped aside sharply, thinking it was dangerous. It was good that he had already gotten the hang of it. The boar couldn't stop and hit its head on a rock, losing consciousness, and Gigi approached it and said that it had mutated. Since it had come to him, he would transport it to his space. He put his hand on the animal's body, but nothing happened, and he asked why it didn't work. Could it be that it doesn't work with living creatures? After that, a loud squeal rang out in the forest, and he sent the boar to his space, smiling and saying that he had finally succeeded. Soon he returned to the city and entered a restaurant, where he was greeted by a waitress, and he said he was so hungry. By happy coincidence, Jojo was sitting at one of the tables and broadcasting live. She asked viewers not to forget to vote for her at tomorrow's cooking event and said she loved them. Hearing a familiar voice, Shannon turned around and quickly approached her, asking if she was Jojo. She asked who he was. He showed her profile on his phone and said he was her biggest fan. The female camerawoman laughed and said they had a real fan here, and then started filming them both. Gigi sat opposite his idol, and viewers in the chat started writing that he was so handsome and hoped they would get married. Where did such a handsome fan come from? He himself is like an idol. Other female viewers asked him to fall in love with them, and some were even jealous. Jojo was very nervous at the time and thought he was handsome. She couldn't even find the words. She took out her phone and asked him to introduce himself, but suddenly a man lunged at their table, and Gigi exclaimed, "What is he doing?" The man looked straight into the camera, and the viewers saw that he looked like a zombie and wrote in Jojo's chat that she should run away quickly. Suddenly, another crazy guy ran past the main character, and he exclaimed, "What's going on here?" For some unknown reason, people pounced on the meat like animals, and even started fighting each other over it, while a waitress hugged her colleague and exclaimed that they had suddenly gone berserk. One of these zombies rushed straight at Jojo, and she screamed loudly, then rushed into Shenyang's arms and asked him for help, and he immediately kicked the man away and told her not to be afraid, he was there. After everyone calmed down, Gigi began to ask where the meat in the restaurant came from. He said that they had all eaten meat dishes before they started rioting. The manager replied that a man had brought it yesterday and didn't even take any money. The chef confirmed her words and said that the man looked very trustworthy, so they took it. Plus he had one eyebrow. Shannon thought for a second. And then the image of Su Yuan popped into his head and he thought, could it be that guy? He asked if he could take the meat back. It would be better not to serve it to guests anymore. The manager smiled awkwardly and replied that she would pack it up right away. After that, the main character headed for the exit with a bag of meat, deciding to deal with it. And the administrator wished him a safe journey and said they would be waiting for him again. Jojo, meanwhile, was a little upset because she didn't have time to get his number. The sun had already set and the main character was walking home. He took a photo of the meat in the bag and sent it to his future self, saying that he had stumbled upon meat with yin yang energy here. The people who ate it went crazy. What is it? He replied that it came from a mutated beast and that ordinary people couldn't eat it. The protagonist asked why. His future self replied that such beasts were prone to violence, and ordinary people who ate it would simply damage their brains. Negative emotions would intensify, and it would all end in madness. Shen sent a surprise sticker and asked if anything would happen to him if he ate it. The other replied that they were different. Their bodies had been transformed by directly absorbing yin yang. Eating such food would help him strengthen his energy. Gigi touched his forehead in confusion and said he understood, then wrote that some guy gave him the meat, and he thinks it was Su Yuan, the one who breathes fire. The future man replied that he had formed a peculiar impression of this guy. Some organization was behind him, so he should be careful with him. At that moment, Sun Ming called him and said that he had business to attend to, so he would not be returning today, and that he should rest. The main character exclaimed indignantly, did he really drink too much? Meanwhile, his friend was showing off in front of the mirror, admiring his muscles and body covered with white scales, and said that he didn't want to hurt him. He had changed and was now forced to bear the heavy burden of responsibility for saving the world. He could no longer fool around. The guy remembered how he was walking down the street recently, and some motorcyclists stole a girl's bag. But he immediately rushed to help and stopped the thieves with a single kick. He smiled, fixed his hair, and told Sheng not to blame him. He had simply become a different person. At that moment, the door to his house opened, and he asked who was there. An old man named Hongju entered his house with his entourage and introduced himself, saying that he was from a special department. He unceremoniously entered the room and sat down on a chair, inviting him to join them. Sun Ming was stunned by such an unexpected offer, while Gigi was having dinner alone in his house. With tears in his eyes, he thought that he should have eaten for free at that cafe. Now he had to spend his own money. He remembered that before that, his future self had written that in 3 days, there would be another energy outbreak on Mount Wanyan. There was no such place on the map. He just needed to find the village and prepare himself, as people from the organization would also be there. Shen said he didn't know what this organization did, but with his current abilities, it was better for him not to stick his neck out. His phone rang, and he answered, asking who it was. A man's voice came from the phone, saying it was Zhou Yuan, his former classmate. He had heard that Zhou Yuan was looking for a job. The protagonist rubbed his chin in confusion and wondered if Zhou Yuan really wanted to offer him something. Zhou Yuan said they had a cooking event tomorrow. They were short on security, so could he come? He remembered that Zhou Yuan was pretty good at fighting. Shen was very happy and agreed, asking him to tell him the location. Zhou replied that he needed to come to Huamingxian tomorrow at 8 a.m. The call ended, and the meeting place seemed familiar to Gigi. He thought, hadn't Zhou mentioned this place in her broadcast? His cheeks flushed slightly, and he said that it was so cool, maybe he would get to meet her. Meanwhile, Jojo was lying on her bed in her room, hugging her pillow, thinking that today's guy was so cool and handsome. She covered her flushed face with the pillow and said she hoped they would meet again. If he was her fan, he would definitely have to come there. The next day arrived, and in Huamingxian, where Gigi was supposed to go, a cooking competition was already underway. He arrived on time and, seeing Jojo in the crowd, called out to her, and she asked happily, "So he's here too?" But they were not allowed to talk, and she was taken away to have her makeup done, while Sheng was called over by his former classmate, who said that the job was to guard Shuyusi for a few days. There would be an interview, but he shouldn't worry. Everything would be fine. The protagonist didn't know the name and asked if it was some kind of star. Zhou Wang put his hand on his shoulder and asked if he really didn't know. Many people had asked him to save this place for them, but he had saved it for him. The protagonist told him not to worry, it was just an interview. With his personal abilities, there would be no problems. But problems arose nonetheless. When Zhou Wang brought his friend to a man named Lao Lao, he asked where he had found this monkey. He thought he was useless. These words hurt Shen, and his friend replied that he shouldn't say that he was his former classmate and very talented. If he didn't believe him, he could check for himself. He replied that he would still have to earn recognition. Zhou Wang exclaimed, "What kind of joke is this?" "It's just an interview. There's nothing unusual about it." He replied that he didn't care. Those were the rules. It was not possible without Han Feng's recommendation. Zhou Wang got angry and was about to go over to him to sort things out. But the protagonist stopped him and said that they should do as he said. His friend exclaimed that it was obvious that the others had just passed. Why the hell was he picking on him? The main character asked him not to get nervous. Jojo, who was sitting nearby, overheard their conversation and thought she heard that the person in charge was a 7th-rank black belt in boxing. Could this handsome guy handle him? Meanwhile, 2 guys from the crowd said that he looked pretty strange and wasn't even fit to be Han Feng's shoe. Jojo approached them and smiled, telling them not to look down on him as he was very strong. Shen thanked her for her words of support, which made her blush. Then he walked onto the platform and stood in front of Han Feng. His opponent asked, "So he's the one who's going to fight?" He confirmed his words and said it was time to start. Han Feng looked at him calmly, then swung his leg to kick, but the protagonist leaned back in time and almost fell. He leaned his hand on the ground and kicked, and Han Feng defended himself but couldn't stay on his feet and stumbled backward, falling right on top of Lao Lao. Shen helped him up and asked what he thought of him. He replied that he was pretty good. He was much stronger than him. Shu Yusi would definitely be safe. The protagonist smiled, scratched the back of his head, and thanked him. Joju happily threw herself into her friend's arms and exclaimed that he had won. Other people, on the contrary, were upset and Jojo's friend called out to Shen and said she wanted to get his number. Her fans hearing this were very upset and exclaimed, "How did he get so lucky? It's so unfair." Meanwhile, Lao Lao went to the restroom and called his boss, saying that something had gone wrong. The person in charge had just been beaten up by some guy. The boss exclaimed, "Do you mean that Han Feng was defeated by a newcomer?" He confirmed his words and said that he had been introduced by one of the organizers, a man named Zhou. Lao wanted to say something else, but his boss interrupted him and said that it would all be over soon, but he must not forget who he works for. He trembled with fear and said that he obeyed the organization's orders and would never go against them. At that moment, a car pulled up to the festival venue, and people ran up to it, excitedly saying that Shu Yusi was there. Shen wanted to exchange phone numbers with Jojo, but he was distracted by the noise and asked what was going on. Hearing a familiar name, he said goodbye to Jojo and said he had to work. Shu Yusi got out of the car, and a woman asked her to be careful. Gigi stepped forward, and she asked who he was and what he wanted. He greeted them and introduced himself, saying he was responsible for Shu Yusi's personal safety. The excited crowd began to approach them, and Jojo said that now her fans were chasing her. She suddenly lost her balance and started to fall with a scream, but the main character caught her in time and told her to be careful. She was embarrassed and laughed nervously, looking at him, while Shu Yusi smiled. After that, they got into her car to discuss his work. The woman said that he was very attentive, even with his busy schedule. He found time to protect others. He replied that it was just a side job, and she could try it too. Shu Yusi asked if he was really a good bodyguard. He looked so ordinary. Gigi apologized and said he just hadn't slept well last night. It didn't matter how he looked. The main thing was that he could protect her. She frowned and remained silent. Something about him still made her feel uncomfortable. Shenron, meanwhile, wrote to his future self and asked if he had heard about the gourmet competition. He was now working as a personal bodyguard. His future self had failed to defeat Han Feng and had been expelled. But he should be careful because Shu Yusi might be kidnapped there. It seems like she's involved in something, but he doesn't know what exactly. After reading this message, the main character decided that he needed to take it seriously. Soon everyone gathered at the huge stage trying to get closer to Shu Yusi. Her fans began asking her to look at them, and someone shouted that he wanted to marry her, while Jojo literally began to drown in the crowd and held her friend's hand, saying that there were so many people here. She looked at Shen Yang and how he was doing his job, and sadly thought that she wished he were here now. At that moment, he was pushing back the fans, and Shu Yusi, watching him, wondered why he had suddenly become so serious. They went backstage and she handed him a towel, thanking him for his work, and he said it was just his duty. He concentrated and closed his eyes, thinking that he was now using his perception to see if there was any danger nearby. A familiar energy began to emanate from a box carried by one of the workers, and he asked what was inside. The man replied that they were prizes for this contest. They say these fruits are from the mountains. Gigi became interested, and the man pulled his cap over his face, laughing nervously and saying that rich people now say that fruit from the mountains is sweeter. Shannon looked at the fruit, thinking that it exuded a unique aroma. So troubled people would definitely want to get their hands on it. But he still didn't understand why they wanted to kidnap Shu Yusi. He looked at her and wondered if she had anything to do with all this. At that moment, she checked the event schedule, then went on stage and greeted everyone, saying she was happy to meet them. One of her fans held a poster above his head and greeted her loudly. He climbed over the barrier and headed towards her, but Han Feng tried to stop him and told him not to do it. The crazy fan looked at him with displeasure, then punched him in the chest with tremendous force, and climbing onto the stage, showed Shu Yusi a poster with a heart drawn on it and said he loved her. As the situation began to get out of control, the main character stood in front of her and told the fan to quickly get off the stage, while his colleague warned him that the guy was strong. Covering Shu Yusi with his body, the main character slapped the man, then pushed him in the chest and told him to tell her who sent him. Lao Lao pushed Shenyang in the shoulder and said that was enough. Let them take the man away. He and Han Feng knocked the fan to the floor and told him not to move, but he begged them to let him go. He needed to see her. He cursed silently and thought that he was so close, he almost got it. Then the woman approached Shu Yusi and asked if she was okay. She replied that she was just scared and that they could continue. Gigi looked at the crazy fan and thought that this man was physically stronger than usual. He touched his colleague's shoulder and asked him to follow him. After which they left the stage and he said that Shu Yusi was still in danger. Han Feng asked what he meant. He replied that he couldn't rely on that staff member. There were too many people near the stage and something was bound to go wrong. He was afraid he wouldn't be able to protect her. Hin replied that he understood and that he would personally negotiate with the security outside. His job was to protect her up close. The rest of the day passed without incident, and they checked into the hotel. After taking a shower, the main character lay down on the bed and said that fortunately, nothing more dangerous had happened today except for that fan. He needed to check everything before going to bed. He got up and closed his eyes, concentrating on his surroundings. And when he didn't sense Shu Yusi's presence in the next room, he became very anxious. He frowned and wondered if she had left. Moreover, he saw a trace of energy and thought that she had just left, so he needed to catch up with her quickly. He left his room and looked around, then noticed a small trace following Shu Yusi, who was heading for the exit. He followed her and saw that she had gone to meet Wei Wei. Watching them, he sighed with relief and thought that he had been scared. How did these two know each other? Suddenly, his eyes widened. He felt a murderous aura behind him and jumped aside just before the blade pierced his head. The knife stuck into the wall, and the crazy fan cursed loudly, exclaiming that he was tired of him. The main character turned around and did not recognize him. Dodging the second knife, he took a gun out of his space and aimed it at the attacker, who became very nervous and wondered where he had gotten it. Deciding not to take any chances, the attacker stopped running, thinking that he needed to retreat for now. Apparently, he needed to find another opportunity to complete his mission. Shannon started shooting at him and, noticing that he had disappeared, hid the gun and said that he was pretty fast. But the police must have heard the shots, so he wouldn't dare do anything else today. He continued to watch her, and when Shu Yusi finally returned to her room and fell asleep, he was able to breathe a sigh of relief, and then went to bed himself. The purple-clad girl, who had been watching him all this time, looked into his window and told her subordinate not to provoke him. He replied that he had to test his strength, that the organization wanted to test and evaluate him. She turned to him and told him to remember that he was very strong and should not be provoked unnecessarily. The organization did not want another enemy like him. He replied that he understood and said that he had heard that the higher-ups were considering accepting him into the organization. She replied that it was none of his business. As for Shu Yusi, they should not interfere. Their only task was to watch over Shannon and make sure he did not die. Let him remember that they were not allowed to interfere in the affairs of wealthy families. Let him be grateful. With these words, she vanished into thin air, and her subordinate bowed to her, and pushing the bullets out of his chest, stood up and walked forward down the street. Some time passed, a bright night passed, and now Shu Yusi had already taken the stage, and the host said that today was the last day of the awards ceremony. Gigi stood in front of her, looking suspiciously at the crowd, and heard the voices of some of them. One man said that this guy was so troublesome. His colleague asked him to calm down, saying that their mission was only related to her. Let him remember that they needed to get to those fruits. The other replied that he remembered. It's just that he was still causing a lot of trouble. When the awards were presented, one of them would come out as the winner's representative and immediately begin to carry out the plan. Then Shayna looked at the men dressed as event workers and thought that these guys were strong and sturdy, assembled just like soldiers. Wei Wei can organize a special task force, which is really not that easy. The host announced that Hooks was in first place, and from the side came the happy laughter of a man who said it was him. But at that moment, the voice of the fake winner said he was here. Shannon realized that these were two different voices and became very nervous. Looking at the owner of the first voice and seeing that he was only approaching the stage, while the second had already taken the fruit from Shu Yusi's hands and was rejoicing in his victory in this operation. He told his comrades that he had the fruit. Gigi barely managed to run up, and several men immediately climbed onto the stage and ran straight towards them as a crowd. Noticing this, Shannon told Shu Yusi not to be afraid. He was there. He told her to close her eyes and hide behind his back. She followed his instructions, and he clenched his fists, already preparing to fight back. But suddenly everyone was stunned. The special forces, disguised as workers, caught the attackers, and the main character looked closely and noticed tranquilizer needles in their necks. The same needle flew straight at him, and he was confused, noticing Wei Wei in the crowd, mentally exclaiming, "How dare she attack him in front of everyone?" His absorption skill activated, and the needle disappeared into thin air. And he pretended to lose consciousness, thinking he would find out what they were up to. Seeing this, Xu Wang ran to his friend and Han Feng exclaimed, "What are they doing?" One of the workers showed him his officer's ID, and he was at a loss, and could do nothing but watch as his unconscious colleague was dragged into the car. Xu Wang asked, "What's going on here?" After a while, Shannon was laid on the sofa, and Wei Wei, who was nearby, invited Xu Yuzi to talk. As soon as she entered, she asked what was going on. How was he? She replied that he was fine, just unconscious. She seemed very concerned about him. Xu Yuzi smiled and asked, "Is that what she thinks? He doesn't know anything. So why did she bring him here?" She heard that she had awakened her ability. Wei Wei frowned and told her not to ask about things she shouldn't know. She said that this guy wasn't bad. She was just curious. She should be careful, as walls have ears. She knows a lot about modern technology, so it would be bad if someone overheard their conversation. Who doesn't know about the talented Miss Q? What news does she know? Everyone is so deceived by her appearance. Shannon thought, how many people outside know about the daughter of the Shu family? They are the strongest of the 4 great families in Silver City. Qtin Bao is a prominent figure with businesses across the country, vast wealth, and several entertainment companies. Xu Yusi is rumored to be a director working in these companies. The whole city belongs to her family. He opened his eyes slightly, and Xu Yusi asked how things were going outside. She replied that it was almost over. The people she had sent were the elite, so everything would go well. She would return when it was over. She headed for the door and was about to leave, but suddenly cracks appeared on her, and she was knocked out by a guard. Someone with red eyes kicked him very hard. She looked at him in surprise, and Xu Yusi rushed to her, telling her to be careful. She immediately kicked the man who had burst into the room, but he managed to block the kick, and she suddenly cried out in pain, stepping back. He asked where the spiritual fruits were. Wei Wei's face darkened, and she replied that she didn't understand what he was talking about. He immediately kicked her, but she defended herself. And he grinned, saying that she was quite strong. He kicked her hard, but she blocked the blow in time and counterattacked, thinking he had crazy strength. She swung her fist furiously, but couldn't land a blow, and decided to hit him in the stomach with her knee. Meanwhile, the main character continued to lie down and thought that he did not feel any elemental fluctuations. It seems she hasn't awakened yet, so why is the aura so strong? At that moment, the mustachioed man said he was tired of playing, then suddenly approached the girl and punched her in the stomach, causing blood to gush from her mouth and her to fall to the floor. He raised his foot above her head and told her to die, which frightened Xu Yusi very much, and she rushed towards him. Fortunately, Gigi arrived in time to help and threw a card at the man, but he managed to dodge it. Shannon picked up Wei Wei and moved aside, asking if she was okay. The man nervously looked at the key card stuck in the wall, and Wei Wei exclaimed in surprise, "Did he just wake up?" He smiled slightly and replied that he hadn't fallen asleep. He was just teasing them. After that, the same thought flashed through the girls' minds. Had he heard what they were talking about? The main character sat the girl down on the sofa and told her to rest first. Then he touched her shoulder, using his ability, and she thought that his hands were warm and her pain was subsiding. Was he healing her? She told him not to leave, that he couldn't handle it. Besides, it was none of his business. Leijin, meanwhile, clenched his fist and said with a smile that he was curious where he came from, but it seemed he was just an insignificant bug. Shannon turned to him and said not to guess. He was just an ordinary handsome man. Even if he killed him, no one would come after him. Hearing this, the girls were horrified and thought he was a fool. Now he would not hold back. At that moment, Gigi gave him the middle finger and said with a smirk that if he really wanted to finish him off, he would have to go back to his mother's womb and train there for several more decades. These words provoked the man, and he said that the protagonist was asking for trouble. The main character felt that the elemental aura had changed, completely concealing the absorbed power without losing a drop. It seemed that the breathing technique he had developed was definitely not simple. At that moment, his opponent struck the first blow, which he immediately dodged, and then struck back. Blood gushed from the man's mouth and nose, and he gave him a dissatisfied look, then hit him with his knee. But the protagonist reacted in time and put out his hand. Feeling his strength being transferred to him, he thought, is he absorbing it? He smiled, blocking his leg, and thought that he could not only absorb the power from attacks, but also accumulate it within himself. His opponent increased the distance between them, and caught his breath while the protagonist concentrated and realized that the sounds of battle outside were subsiding and he no longer felt hostility. It seemed that everyone was gradually calming down. The Chu family held this event with spiritual fruits as prizes to lure those who craved them. However, no one thought that the group would be so strong. The army, which had originally cooperated with the Chu family, did not want to offend this unknown organization. They would let each other fight until one of them won. The man called out to him and asked who he was. The main character didn't let him finish and said that he was talking too much during the fight. Clenching his fist, he suddenly rushed at him and exclaimed that it was time to die. And his opponent responded by calling him an arrogant brat. Their fists collided, and two powerful energy waves emanated from their hands. Lei Jin recoiled, shaking his broken palm, and said that it was impossible. How did he absorb his chi wave? Coughing up blood, he fell unconscious to the floor, and Gigi thought that he had just absorbed all of his chi and then returned it all at once. Suddenly, Shu Yuxi's voice came from behind, calling out his opponent's name and saying that he was a master invited by the Chen family. It was said that Lei Jin was an ancient warrior. Shannon looked at her in surprise and thought, are there still such people in this world? Now that elemental key had appeared, it was quite possible that these so-called ancient warriors would also appear. It seemed that they had a special method of absorbing energy, and this ancient technique, passed down through the years, is very useful for cultivation. Otherwise, it would be impossible to learn the cultivation method immediately after awakening. She continued by saying that Lei Jing's teacher is called Master Yan. It is said that he possesses incredible power. Even now, some awakened ones cannot compare to him. He should be careful because if he finds out that he killed his disciple, he will definitely take revenge on him. She became worried and said that she would take full responsibility for this. She would say that he was from their family. If he wanted to bring trouble upon him, it would also be trouble for her family. She felt very sorry that she had dragged him into this. She thought he was just an ordinary security guard, but she did not expect this. He interrupted her and said that she shouldn't do that. He killed him, so he would take responsibility for it himself. If Master Yan wanted to kill him, then let him tell him that he was waiting. She objected, saying that he had fought him for her sake. This time, she would not let him risk himself. Besides him, he should also be wary of the Qin family. Even if they didn't get anything this time, it was different for him. He wasn't a member of any faction, so they would definitely find a way to deal with him. Wei Wei sat down and looked anxiously at Shinon, then called out to him and asked if he would like to return to the army with her. They would not harm him. He looked at her suspiciously and thought that she herself had recently sent someone to knock him out. When everything was resolved, sooner or later he would definitely get even with her. He turned toward the exit and replied that he was tired, that it had been a hard day, so he was going home to sleep. The girls were very surprised by this answer, and then time passed. It was already dark outside, and as he was heading home, he decided to check his messages. All this time, Zhou Wang and Han Feng had been asking if he was okay. He thought it was so sweet and replied to both of them that he was fine. Nothing had happened. He thought that Shu Yuxi was so worried about Yan de Shifu and those ancient warriors. They must be strong opponents. Should he ask his future self about this? His future self would tell him not to worry, that they were just some old men arguing about everything. They were definitely not worth his attention. Gigi smiled confidently and crossed his arms over his chest, wondering why a handsome guy like him should even bother about this. Soon he approached the door of the house and began searching his pocket for his keycard. But when he found it empty, he suddenly remembered that he had left it behind as a hidden weapon, but had been too busy to remove it from the wall. He needed to call his friend urgently. He took out his phone and was about to dial the number, but suddenly the phone vibrated, and he saw that Sun Ming was already calling him. He answered the call and nervously said that he was just about to call him, but his friend stopped him and apologized, saying that something had happened at home, so he couldn't be with him. Could he look after his house? The main character became concerned and asked where he was. Had something happened? He replied that it was nothing. He didn't need to worry. If anything happened, he would let him know. He just wanted him to know that he wouldn't be able to keep in touch for a while. He should take care of his house, did he understand? He said goodbye to Shannon and ended the conversation. And at that moment, Hongju approached him and said that now that he had given him the order, today's training mission would be more difficult. He threw a heavy bag at his feet, and he, almost crying, thought he would not survive this training. He started running away and shouted loudly that he no longer wanted to save the world. He wanted to be a normal guy. Meanwhile, his friend looked at the screen with a puzzled expression and thought that he seemed to be hiding something. He hoped that everything was okay with him. He remembered the key card again and exclaimed that if he couldn't get in, it would be the end of him. An hour later, the locksmith arrived and successfully did his job. And Shengan, having parted with his money, waved goodbye to the man with tears in his eyes. As soon as he entered the house, an unknown number called him, and he answered the call. Jojo's voice came from the phone, awkwardly asking if he was okay. Hearing the familiar voice, he asked her name, and she laughed happily, saying she didn't think he would recognize her. It seems he is a real fan. He smiled and replied that he watched her streams every day. She said she heard from his friend that he had been taken away. She was worried about him, so she asked for his number. It seems like he's okay now, right? He replied that since she could hear him loud and clear, he was fine. What happened earlier was a misunderstanding. By the way, was there a problem? Ju replied that everything was fine now. She was already home and had asked her boss for time off, so she would be home for a few days. He sat down on the sofa and asked where she lived. She replied that she lived in the village of Wanyuan. He probably hadn't heard of it, just like her fans, but he shouldn't tell anyone about it. The main character suddenly remembered that his future self had instructed him to go to this village and thought how small the world was. Jojo continued, saying that their village was hard to find, but it was beautiful. When he had time, he could come and see the local scenery. The protagonist awkwardly asked if she would accompany him if he went to this village. She was very surprised by his proposal and exclaimed in embarrassment, "Are you serious?" She was delighted and thought, "Is he asking me out on a date?" But she needed to control herself. Suppressing her excitement and joy, she calmly replied that when he came, she would entertain him, she promised, after which he decided to rest on the sofa. He thought that now he needed to train hard. Half an hour later, he thought that his energy reserves still seemed too low. He had not made enough progress and cultivation to deal with those strong people. He looked at his phone and saw a notification about a new message. He laughed and said that he had to rely only on himself. The future Shayna sent him a file containing a secret guide to the Broken Star Blade technique. Time passed and soon it was morning, and the main character had already begun training. Waving his racket, he asked his imaginary audience, "Who are you?" He is the head of Shayna's sword. He had already mastered the Star Slash technique, but now he had no sword in his hand, and the sensations were different. He needed to get a weapon somehow. He looked at the damage to the house caused by his training and exclaimed, "What happened to the apartment?" An hour later, he went to the bus stop and, buying a ticket, thought it was good that he had caught the earliest bus, and now he was on his way to Wanyuan village. He got on the bus and set off, and on the way he decided to enter the void. He looked at the iron tree he had grabbed last time and said it would make good material. He forged a sword from this tree and, running his hand along the blade, said that he could indeed do this. In this world, he could desire anything his heart desired. Water from the lake began to rise in drops, and as he watched, he said that this living water also obeyed him. He joyfully exclaimed that he could now walk on water and took a few steps across the lake, then ran and laughed loudly, saying that he had magic boots. He returned to dry land and with a slight movement of his hand lifted the iron trees into the air, and turning them into swords, threw them to the ground and wondered, was he really invincible? He smiled confidently and shouted that he wanted to create Mount Deshing, but after a few seconds of waiting, nothing happened, and he realized that it was impossible to create objects here, only to transform existing ones. He vaguely heard a woman's voice telling him to wake up, that this was the last stop. She shook his shoulder and told him again to wake up, after which he came to his senses, and looking at her angry face, apologized awkwardly to her. After that, he got off the bus and looked into the distance, saying that although this place was in the middle of nowhere, the scenery here was stunning. He looked around and, making sure no one was around, he crouched down, bending his knees, and then quickly ran to the village. Soon he reached the stone stele at the entrance and saw the villagers. He approached one of them and awkwardly asked if this was the village of Wanyuan. The man asked if he had come from another city. He confirmed his words and said that he had come to see his classmates. The man told him to stop lying and asked if he was a member of an archaeological expedition. They, the visitors, love to deceive simple people like them. Last time, someone like that came and also said he was looking for someone, And yesterday evening, he brought people to conduct some excavations in the mountains. Hearing this, the main character became nervous and realized that he had been beaten to the punch. And the man continued, saying that in the morning, he sensed something was wrong because a group of people with special equipment had gone there. This was strange because there was no cultural heritage in the village. What were they looking for there? And why had he come here? Or could he not say because it was a big secret? He didn't answer and asked who else had come. The man crossed his arms over his chest, raised one eyebrow slightly, and said that the man seemed to be a local, but was only asking him questions. Or was he lying again? At that moment, Jojo approached him, called him Dad, and asked him to look at what she had bought. Hearing a familiar voice, Shannon peeked out from behind the man's back and called out to the girl, and she exclaimed in embarrassment, asking how he had found her here. Her father was very surprised and asked if he was her classmate. Could it be that he and his daughter really studied together? He remained silent, and then someone called the man, and he answered, exclaiming that he didn't have time for calls right now, and then asked what he meant by, his daughter is going to be kidnapped? Meanwhile, Jojo approached her friend and said that she didn't think he would be able to find this place so quickly. He replied that it wasn't difficult. If he wanted to, he could find anything. At that moment, the pursuer used her invisibility to watch them from the roof, and seeing a familiar face, said that it turned out he had come too. At that moment, the main character held out his hand to Jojo and said he would show her a trick. She asked in surprise if he also knew magic. He said that as soon as he counted to 3, she should watch closely. The protagonist began to count, and when he finished, a bracelet with an angel icon appeared in his palm, and she asked in admiration how he did it. It was so beautiful, but too expensive for her. He smiled and replied that he had made it himself without spending a penny, so if she liked it, she should take it. She pressed his gift to her chest and replied that she liked it very much. But next time, he shouldn't give her such expensive gifts. He smiled and asked, "Next time?" She exclaimed in embarrassment that it wasn't what he thought. At that moment, the main character's face suddenly changed, and he turned around anxiously, sensing an aura of anger. She asked what was wrong. Seeing no one suspicious behind them, he replied that everything was fine. At that moment, her father approached them and asked sternly if they were done talking. They needed to go look for her mother. Schengen shuddered at the sight of him. Jojo apologized to him and asked where he lived and if he was going home soon. He replied that he was actually looking for a place to stay. He wanted to ask her about it, but suddenly her father approached him menacingly, and he decided to remain silent. After that, she left with her father and, turning to Shen Yang, asked him to write to her later. He said goodbye to her, after which the smile disappeared from his face, and he turned to the empty field and asked who she was. The girl appeared out of nowhere, became visible, and asked how he had seen her. He replied that it was his intuition. So why was she following him? She replied that she wasn't really following him. Had he just arrived? She approached him and walked ahead down the street, saying she wanted to chat with him and that he should follow her. He probably came here because he felt the earth tremble. They have the same goal. She thinks they should work together. They approached an abandoned house, and she said that, after all, they had already worked together before. He was very surprised by this, and Su Yuan came out of the ruined house and greeted him. Seeing the guy who had abandoned him that time, he became very angry and looked at him hostile, asking if he considered himself a reliable partner. The guy nervously replied that he had been too scared at the time, but now he was fine. He swore. Violet said that it seemed like something had happened between them. Gigi asked why he should trust him then. Su Yuan replied that the firepower in his body was uncontrollable. He had come here to learn how to control the abilities within himself. The awakened must constantly use their abilities, otherwise they will turn against them. But if he uses fire magic, he will be easily detected. The girl said that their situations were the same. They also needed to constantly use their abilities. Su Yuan asked if he felt the same way. The main character replied that his abilities were not as noticeable. The girl said she had learned that the earth would begin to shake today at around 6 p.m., and then a surge of energy would begin. What news did he have? Before answering, Shannon looked at her and thought that their company was so-so, but help wouldn't hurt. Besides, they had good intentions. He shared the location with them, and they were both very surprised. After which the girl smiled and said that with modern technology, they could find out the exact location. But she believed him. He said that when the time came, all he needed was his strength. The rest wasn't that important. Su Wen exclaimed in surprise, "Is it that simple?" The girl replied that there was no problem with that, and now they would change their location and make a deal. Just as she was about to ask something, an explosion suddenly thundered behind him, and Gigi turned around to see burning buildings in the middle of the village. He was very worried about his girlfriend. The girl asked how the house could have exploded. Maybe the energy release caused a gas leak. She didn't know, but maybe the village would soon be destroyed. Su Wen smiled and said that it was a backwater and was about to fall apart anyway, so he didn't care at all. The main character looked at him angrily, then silently rushed towards the burning building, and the other exclaimed, "What's wrong with this guy? Let's see if he can come back alive." His girlfriend said that this time it was too serious. If they wanted to gain any benefit, they would have to cooperate with him. She had heard that he had defeated Lei Jing, and he also had some business connections with Bai Weiwei. He could do whatever he wanted. She didn't care. But if he was going to do something that wasn't planned, he'd better be prepared to face the consequences. She left, and Su Yuan watched her go and said that she was a disgusting woman, and sooner or later he would show her what he was worth. At that moment, the main character wrote to Jojo and asked what had happened, and she replied that everything was fine. A house was on fire in the neighborhood, and they were helping to put it out. He asked her to be careful, and using his heightened perception, saw that she was indeed helping to put out the fire, and thought that it was a little awkward to watch her like that, but it seemed that she was fine. After that, he sent a message to his future self and asked what would happen to the village. He replied that it looked like Wan Yuan would burn down because he hadn't seen Jojo's stream since then. Seeing this, Shannon became very worried and called Jojo, excitedly telling her to return to Yincheng. She should go there that very night, pick up her family, and leave as far away as possible. Confused, she asked what he was talking about. He exclaimed that the world had changed and her village would be destroyed. A fire had suddenly broken out there. Didn't she find it all strange? She was silent, thinking about it, and after a short pause said that in fact a barn had caught fire yesterday, and now again today. Before that, fires in the village were rare. Did he really know something? He replied that he didn't know how to explain it, but hoped she would believe him. After that, he hung up and saw Jojo arguing with her father on the stairs in the distance. But he didn't listen to her and went downstairs to get water, while she took out her phone and wrote to her friend that she needed to consult with her family. In any case, she was grateful to him for his concern. He read it and thought, how could she leave based solely on his words? He looked up at the sky and saw her emerging from behind the clouds and realized that the time was coming soon. As he had said, there would be huge bursts of energy, and the consequences would be irreversible. At that moment, the earth shook. The villagers felt the tremors and ran in panic. And then suddenly, multicolored beams of light appeared among the houses and shot into the sky. A series of explosions thundered throughout the village, and someone exclaimed, "What the hell is going on?" Another man ordered everyone to gather, and people in identical clothing knelt around the fire when suddenly bullets flew past them. Wei Wei waved her hand to signal for the shooting to stop, then ordered them to put out the fire first and deal with the rest later. Su Yuan shouted menacingly that whoever extinguished the fire would die. They were preventing him from becoming stronger. His whole body was engulfed in flames, and since he possessed the energy of fire, he could absorb it, thereby increasing his own strength. He turned to Wei Wei and said that she had the ability to control metal energy, and he did not expect to see that again. A group of people reached out their hands to the fire and began to extinguish it, while Su Yuan shot fire at Wei Wei, calling her a scoundrel. She put her hand under the fire and defended herself, and he spread his arms and said that her body could withstand the fire, but her clothes probably couldn't. So if she got in his way, he would burn all her clothes. In response, she took off her jacket, threw it on the ground, and clenched her fists in rage, wishing him dead. After these words, she rushed at him, and he exclaimed that she was a good fighter. She approached him and said that he burned well, and at that moment he clapped his hands. But she managed to hide behind a rock in time, and flames burst around her opponent. He said she was so clever and asked if she behaved the same way in bed, suggesting that she come out so they could have fun to their heart's content. She said he had a dirty mouth, and he laughed and wanted to say something to her, but suddenly she peeked out from behind her cover and threw something at him. Several pieces of stone flew at him, and he stopped them in surprise, but he didn't notice that his opponent had already managed to approach him and clench her hand into a fist. She hit him in the face, and he staggered but managed to stay on his feet. and wiped the blood away, saying that if she hit him again, he would die. She clenched her fists and defiantly told him to try, because this was only the beginning. At this time, Violet watched everything from the sidelines and thought that it wasn't enough, because he had nothing but hidden strength. Shannon approached the epicenter of the fire and noticed that it was getting hotter and hotter. He felt a burst of energy, and then saw that he had stepped right into the fire, and cursed loudly, then began waving his arms and legs and shouting that he was hot. Getting rid of the flames around him, he covered his body with energy, and thought that the flames had already spread here, and that energy would soon appear here. He felt a burst of power behind him, and rejoiced, then opened up space and began to absorb, gaining 1,500 points each time. Feeling a surge of strength, he sighed with a smile and said that he seemed to have become twice as strong. Suddenly, he felt something else besides energy, and jumped back sharply, seeing smoke coming from the stones. An invisible woman appeared in front of him and asked what he thought about their reliable cooperation, wondering if he hadn't told her where he would be and why she hadn't come there. Not only did she not have good intentions, but she was also lying to him. What about her companion? She remained silent and crossed her arms over her chest, and he, taking this as an answer, asked if he had abandoned her again. She walked past him and told him not to worry. They could just work together. Everything was on fire. Energy levels were getting higher and higher, which meant that specialists would arrive soon. She wanted to set up a magic seal nearby, so she needed his help. He imagined the seal and looked at her skeptically. And she said she could use her magic to hide the area around them, so no one would notice them absorbing energy. But to do that, she needed his energy. She turned to him with a confused look on her face, and he exclaimed, why did she suddenly blush? Because she wanted to get his energy. But how? He imagined that the energy exchange would happen through a kiss, and he blushed himself. And she said irritably that he just needed to sit behind her, cross his legs, and put his hands on her back. He followed her instructions and said with an awkward smile that he was just joking and that she shouldn't be so angry. He put his hands on her shoulders and began to pour his energy into her body, which made her flinch, and then began to create a seal. A huge magical dome appeared above them, and she said that now no one outside could find them, and they could calmly absorb energy. Noticing that his hands were still on her shoulders, she looked at him angrily and told him to remove them, after which he recoiled and became nervous. She sat down in a meditation pose and closed her eyes, and after a while wondered why the energy was being absorbed so slowly. Opening her eyes slightly, she looked at Sheng Ying and wondered in surprise how this was possible, why he was absorbing spiritual energy so quickly, and whether he really had A-level talent. An hour passed, and after that time, the barrier naturally fell, and Wei Wei continued to fight. They were both already quite exhausted, and the fiery one cursed loudly, saying that she was stupid but fought well. One of the group members noticed someone standing off to the side and said that there was someone there, and Wei Wei turned around and asked if it was Shinan. The soldiers saw him calmly walk past them with a girl, and the soldier said it was Mu Lingqiu from the dark group. Hearing this, Wei Wei was surprised, while Mu Lingqiu turned to Shay Nan and told him to take care of himself, after which the soldier fired at her several times, but she dodged, disappearing into thin air. The main character jumped back in surprise, and the soldier rushed past him and began waving his knife, trying to hit her, but unfortunately for him, she was already gone. He decided to switch his attention to her companion, and with a grim expression on his face, adjusted his glasses, declaring that he was in cahoots with her. Realizing that the situation was getting out of control, Wei Wei became very agitated, and Ji, watching the soldier quickly approaching him, thought that he shouldn't underestimate her. She had made the others think that they were working together. But before the guy could strike, he hit him on the head and turned his gaze to the girl, who was looking at him with concern. Clutching his head, the soldier ordered the others not to let him go, and Wei Wei asked where he had been while she was fighting that fiery guy. He ignored her and looked at Shengnan with a grim expression, saying that he was with Mu Lingqiu, and she was from the dark group, which meant he was also bad and needed to be captured. The main character looked at him in confusion. Then 3 soldiers rushed at him, and Wei Wei angrily shouted at Qin Jillian to return immediately, as it was an order. He stopped and said that he had killed his master from the Qin family, and if she didn't interfere with him now, he would no longer cause her any trouble, and she shouldn't blame him for disobeying. Barely holding back her anger, she clenched her hands into fists and thought that all these people from the Qin family No wonder no one had told her the details of this mission, and when he saw her fighting with this guy, for some reason he didn't run to her aid, but immediately rushed after Shanann. At that moment, the main character sighed with a smile and asked if they were going to pity him or kill him with their words. He looked at his girlfriend and asked if she would mind if he killed them. She replied that he could do whatever he wanted, then beckoned to one of the soldiers with his finger and asked if he was from the Chin family and to attack him. He had 5 seconds to say his last words. Qin Ziliang became angry and wished him dead, after which the soldiers rushed at him, while the protagonist drew his sword, full of aura, and swung it and shouted like a ninja, and then struck so hard that the energy spread everywhere and turned into an explosion, shouting that it was a home run. The soldier was immediately thrown several meters away, and a powerful explosion occurred. And at that moment another appeared behind him, raised his sword above his head, and said that it was the end for him. But the protagonist was faster and pierced his chest with his blade, saying that it was the end for him. After that, the soldier fell dead to the ground, and Qin Ziliang, seeing this, looked at his killer in horror. And then the main character suddenly heard a noise behind him and turned toward the flames, which flared up with renewed force, noting that they were very powerful. He realized that the sounds were coming from the village, and seeing that the enemy was running away, he thought he was an idiot. But now he had no time for him. He had to see what had happened to the village. He used his perception and saw that the entire village was now engulfed in flames. And at the epicenter stood the mad Suyuan. He immediately went to the village and was there in a single leap. And seeing the panicked people with his vision, he cursed loudly, thinking that they needed help. He rescued a woman and a child from the fire and enveloped them in his aura. Suddenly, he heard the voice of Father Jojo asking for help. Lifting the burning beams, he helped him and asked if he was okay. He coughed and thanked him for his help. And the protagonist asked where Jojo was now. He replied that she couldn't sleep and said she was going for a walk, and he hadn't seen her since, asking for help. The main character used his perception again and thought that even with his ability, he couldn't find her, and wondered where she had gone. He was about to go look for her, but he heard loud cries from behind him and ran to help them, thinking that it would be better to help people and look for her at the same time. After a while, he gathered all the survivors in a safe place, and Wei Wei ran up to them and immediately called out for Xingnan. He told her not to worry about him and to send the injured to the hospital instead. She took out her phone and replied that she knew that without him, and at that moment, Gigi felt a surge of energy nearby and headed toward the source. He jumped up and found himself high in the sky, and people looked at him in surprise. And one of them asked if he was a god who had come to help them. At that moment, Shanann was already running through the forest. She stopped abruptly, realizing that this was Jojo's trail. Seeing the entrance to a cave in front of him, he wondered why it was there. The cave was quite spacious, about 2 people wide. He noticed something ahead and became nervous, thinking that it couldn't be, when he encountered a pair of glowing red eyes in the darkness. He backed away and used his ability, and at that moment, a huge bear ran out of the cave toward him. He immediately jumped aside and fearfully told him to wait, noting that he was too big. After the unsuccessful attack, the beast stood up on its hind legs, and he thought that the strength and speed of this bear were abnormally high compared to other animals, and that it had probably mutated. He told it to wait, and it obeyed. Could it really understand him? Gigi nervously raised his hands, showing that he was not dangerous, and told the beast that he did not want to harm it. The bear continued to stand motionless, staring at him, and he wanted to say something else. But at that moment, the bear struck him with its paw, and he flew far back. This made Shanann angry, and he exclaimed that the bear had decided to play unfairly and had now attracted his attention. The fierce beast rushed at him, and he, empowering his right hand, said with a smirk that they could measure their strength, and then struck the bear's paw with his fist. The beast was very surprised to see dancing streams of energy around the man's hand, and then it was thrown back several meters. Blood flowed from its mouth, and it broke free from the cloud of rising dust and growled menacingly, while Gigi clenched his teeth. They both attacked and began to restrain each other's fists and paws, and then several roars and whimpers of the beast were heard. After receiving numerous blows, the frightened bear sat down on the ground, covering its head with its paws. The main character was about to deliver the final blow, but the bear suddenly grabbed his leg, whimpering pitifully. Shanann was surprised and asked if it had changed. Suddenly, his own voice appeared in his head, saying that this was the border of the entrance to the demon world. The protagonist raised his head and mentally exclaimed that it was him from the future and how he was talking to him. The other replied that he didn't know, but he saw the same thing as him, and it seemed to him that he was communicating with his subconscious. Apparently his abilities had improved, and now they could communicate at any time. Sheenan was very surprised and asked if that meant he could see everything, including how he ate, drank, and everything else. The future self covered his face with his hand and asked if it was unpleasant for him. Gigi confirmed his words and asked what the border of the demon world he had mentioned earlier was. The latter replied that, if he understood correctly, this had not existed on Mount Wanyuan before. It had appeared only recently. Over time, the world would begin to change, and there would be more and more such places, and people would set out on the path of their own destruction. The bear was probably from the demon world. Shannon asked what level the bear was at and whether it was stronger than him. He replied that it was nothing more than a common little demon, and as for his level, he was currently at the second level of power. Now everything is divided into levels of power, 9 in total. The first is the weakest, and the 9th is equal to the level of the gods. Currently, his talent is at level A, but if he continues to upgrade his skills, it will improve to level S. The main character noticed that the bear had suddenly shrunk in size and asked his future self about it, who replied that demons have the ability to change their size, one of their basic abilities, and it requires training, so they can only increase in size temporarily. Of course, each demon has its own abilities. The protagonist and the bear went deep into the cave, at the end of which was a lit room, and in the very center on a stone altar lay Jojo, unconscious. He called out to her in surprise and, noticing that the beast was shyly covering its muzzle with its paws, stopped and mentally exclaimed, "Could he have fallen in love with her?" His face darkened, and he approached his friend and shook her shoulders, asking her to wake up. She finally came to and said his name in surprise, and when she saw the animal behind him, she clung to his neck in fear and cried out loudly that there was a bear. He asked if she was okay. As the bear grew larger again and stared at them menacingly, she became even more frightened and warned her friend about it. He looked at the beast and smiled, telling her not to worry, that he had already defeated it. He frowned and, pointing at himself, said that she had defeated it. The bear only growled menacingly in response, and the main character asked in a threatening tone if it didn't like something, and if so, he would simply finish it off. These words had an effect on the bear, and he punched himself in the chest and gave him a thumbs up. After that, the bear bowed to Jojo in apology, and seeing her smile was very pleased. Shanann asked how she got there. She replied that she couldn't sleep after what he had told her and wanted to take a walk in the mountains, breathe some fresh air, and then he came. Gigi looked at the bear, who was scratching the back of his head with a guilty look. And Jojo suddenly remembered his recent words and asked excitedly if he had said that he had defeated him, where he got his abilities, and if he was really awakened. He did not answer and nervously looked away, saying that they had to go. Her family was worried about her. He thought that if he did not stop her, the questions would come endlessly. After that, he picked her up and left the cave, and the bear waved goodbye and wiped away his tears. Jojo said that when he told her everything, she went online to read about it, and everyone was discussing the awakened and how soon the world would change, and then all the news about it suddenly disappeared. He was silent, and she thought with disappointment that he was awakened, which meant he was immortal, and he was no longer like her. Soon they reached the entrance to the village, and Sheenan told her about it, telling her to get off him. She hugged him and said with tears in her eyes that he was no longer an ordinary person, and she wanted to hug him a little longer. She added mentally that this might be their last meeting. She heard the voices of her parents, who were running toward her anxiously, saying that they were so worried about her. She climbed down and looked at them with a smile, wiping away her tears, and they asked if she was hurt. The main character was standing behind them with a gloomy expression on his face, and Jojo replied to her parents that everything was fine and turned around to look at her friend, who silently walked away into the forest. As he walked along the path, Wei Wei caught up with him and asked if he was leaving already, adding that the Chen family would do everything they could to kill him, so he should be careful. He replied that he hadn't even thought about it, but he didn't care. She looked at him and remembered their meeting, thinking that at first he had been foolish and weak, and then suddenly became strong and powerful. Who had he become? Her eyes suddenly widened when she noticed his resemblance to the guy in the monkey mask, and wondered if it was the same person. But then his true power was enormous. He distracted her from her thoughts by waving his hand and thanking her for the warning. After a while, he checked into a hotel to spend the night. Sitting on a chair, he opened the system window and saw that he now had 80,000 points available. And there was also a skill shop where he could buy the skill of seeing through things for 10,000 points, the Spirit Troop skill for 500,000, and the Yuan Energy Breakthrough skill for 1 million. He was interested and wanted to buy something, but his future self did not let him do so and told him to improve his absorption first. He improved the skill to rank S, and the system reported that 50,000 points had been deducted for this. Feeling a surge of energy, he thought that the third-level talent was much stronger, and now he could go to the spatial lake and accumulate points there. After that, he moved into the void and bathed in the lake there, and the system reported that he had received several thousand points. Now he had 98,000 points available, and he smiled and said that he would definitely buy the skill of seeing through things, and that it had better be waiting for him. After a while in the headquarters building, Wei Wei knocked on the director's door, and he told her to come in. Upon entering the office, she immediately froze, seeing Qin Jilang smirking, and her boss asked her to tell him what had happened in Wanyuan village, and what had happened to Shinin. Noticing her subordinate's gaze, she flew into a rage, and then told him that she had seen Shinin with a girl, and that they had had a small argument. A woman entered the office and looked at her intently, and said that she had no more questions for her, that she was not lying. Wei Wei was surprised and thought that the woman had been there all along, but she hadn't even noticed her. And how was that possible? The woman turned to her and held out her hand, saying that she was a psychologist and had used a technique of invisibility to cloud her senses a little, and that she shouldn't be offended. She turned away from the psychologist abruptly, and the woman lowered her hand with a slight smile, then walked over to the director's desk, who began to scold Qin Jilang. He said that he had disobeyed the orders of his captain, Wei Wei, and attacked Shinin without knowing who he was, so he would be expelled from the squad. Qin Ziliang slammed his hands on the table, disagreeing with his decision, calling him an old man and exclaiming, "Does he even know what his family is capable of?" One of the guards punched him in the face, throwing him aside, and the director waved his hand, saying that it was over and that this idiot should be removed. Wei Wei watched as her former subordinate was led out of the office and said that the Qin family would not let it go. He replied that if he said Shinin was the man in the mask, the Qin family would basically not care about such a minor matter. They had done so much for them, and it was time to reward them for it. Let her tell Shinin that they would not interfere and would not help the Qin family. He hoped that Shinin would not hold it against them. Sometime later in the evening, Gigi left the hotel and froze in his tracks when he saw a parked car with Chu Yusi behind the wheel. She lowered her sunglasses and asked with a smile why he had stopped and told him to get in the car. He sat in the passenger seat and asked how she knew where he was and where he was going. She asked if he thought she was following him, that this hotel belonged to her family, and that he was mistaken in thinking she was doing all this out of boredom. A crooked smile appeared on his face, and she said that there were already people stationed around the hotel, and if he left, he would be killed. The Qin family had already given orders for him not to leave the city, and if he was with her, it would be more difficult for them to kill him, because they and the Qin family were still formally on good terms. When Lei Jin died, they suffered great losses and lost all their reputation, so it is in their best interest to remain on good terms with them. Maybe he should go to her instead. He told her to forget about it, that he could handle it himself, but he was grateful for her kindness. But she should stop the car here. He would walk home. She stopped abruptly and sighed heavily, and he opened the door and got out of the car, immediately hearing the man's angry shout. He exclaimed, "Are you crazy? Should our boss pay for food?" And if she continued to complain, they would wipe her store out. Despite the threats, she exclaimed that they couldn't just leave. Noticing that Qin had taken notice of the argument, Chu Yusi got out of the car and asked if he knew them. He replied that the woman had opened the small shop with Malaton herself, and that she was very kind and good. He decided to go closer, and she followed him. And one of the men, named Ahu, asked his friend why he was standing there, and that women these days had no idea about etiquette, and suggested they take her to a karaoke bar in the capital to give her to Mr. Chen, because he needed a mature beauty. The guy grabbed the woman by the arm and said that Brother Ahu was right. This woman had asked for it, so it wasn't his fault. She screamed in pain from her arm, and suddenly a glass bottle flew into her abuser's head, and this time he screamed. Clutching his head, he cursed in rage and shouted, "What kind of blind idiot did this?" But Chin and Chuyusi didn't let him finish and threw two more bottles at him. The main character raised one eyebrow slightly and told her that he had missed, then asked what she was doing. She flexed her wrist and replied that she was just having her period. Ahu exclaimed, asking if they were tired of living. His guys flexed their shoulders and fists, and he lit a cigarette and told them to kill them, as they were nothing but trouble. Before he could bring the cigarette to his mouth, his friends had already fallen down next to him. Chin clenched his fist and his girlfriend closed her eyes and fixed her hair. Seeing them, the man was very surprised, and lingering his gaze on the girl, said that she was pretty and asked if they even knew who he was. But Gigi didn't let him finish and punched him in the face, knocking him to the ground. But he asked them to stop and exclaimed in panic that he was a friend of Master Chin, so it was the end for both of them. The main character looked at his companion and said that the man was Chin's henchman and that he would deal with him while she could go. At that moment, the man stood up and exclaimed, asking if they were afraid, and even though they were leaving, he had already memorized them. He called Chuyusi a bad name, and she smiled at him and asked her friend what she should do, since he had remembered her. Let him kill him, and then she would leave immediately. Gigi chuckled and began to roll up his sleeves, while Ahu waved his hands nervously and exclaimed that he meant she was very beautiful, and he had fallen in love with her at first sight. Not wanting to listen to this, she headed for her car and waved to Chinyu, saying that if there were any problems, he should call her, and her offer was still valid. After that, the main character began to calculate the damage that the hooligans had caused to the shop owner. He said they had to pay 35 wen for 5 servings, plus 500 wen for physical and moral damage, and that they should pay up and leave. Ahu reluctantly handed him the money and thought that they could brag all they wanted now, but he would come and tell Mr. Chin everything. After that, they left, defeated, and the woman, affectionately calling Chin by name, asked him to leave because they would come back and try to find him, and they clearly had no intention of giving up. He called her sister Ching, and helping her clear the table, replied that he was fine, but advised her to leave. Meanwhile, the beaten hooligans returned to their boss, and told him that he had to kill this guy. Chunjalin poured himself some alcohol and asked him to tell him what had happened, and the guys told him everything. As soon as they finished, a man named Liang handed Mr. Chin a tablet and showed him the surveillance footage. He looked at Chin's photo and said that he was so small and asked them to keep an eye on him and bring him to him. He wanted to look at him and look into the eyes of the one whom no one in Yicheng dared to mess with. He bowed slightly and agreed to do as he was told, and then, together with the other guys, went to the house where Chin currently lived. One of the boys pointed to the building and said he had heard that this boy lived there, at the very top. Meanwhile, the main character had just gotten out of the shower and was drying his hair when he heard a knock at the door. He wondered who was banging on his door so late, and then went out to the living room and saw the guys he had just beaten up and Liang sitting on the sofa. His face showed surprise at the uninvited guests, and Ahu, who was eating a banana, threw the peel on the floor and told the others to look at him. He was right in front of them, so they needed to deal with him quickly. Leng frowned and said thoughtfully that he was awake, and Mr. Chin had asked for him to be brought to him, so he should go with them. Gigi turned around and headed for the exit, saying that it was a coincidence. He also wanted to meet him. He smiled and pointed to the door, inviting them to follow him. The scene shifted back to the club. Meanwhile, Jilin was having fun at his karaoke with a girl when he suddenly received a message asking her to wait. He received a letter from his family to which a photo of Shannon was attached, and instructions that no one in their family should act rashly so as not to incur the wrath of this man. But if they had enough strength, they could kill him. He recognized this guy and wondered if he was the one who had defeated Ahu, and smiled, thinking that he was not with these old men now, and sent a message to his subordinate that they could kill him on the spot. After that, he turned to another subordinate and told him to tell Lei Bao that Bai Liang and his 4 men would soon bring his head here. Meanwhile, at the main character's house, Bai Liang read the message and grinned, then took a small knife from under his sleeve and lunged at the protagonist, wishing him dead. He waved the knife right in front of his neck, and the other guys were very happy, but it was still too early. In an instant, Shunan was behind Bai Liang, who noticed this and was surprised for a second, then turned around and waved his arm furiously, saying that he would kill him now. But he missed, or the protagonist simply did not allow himself to be pierced, and the main character was behind him again. Seeing his strength, he realized that he would not be able to defeat him and fell to his knees before him, begging for mercy. The other three guys were surprised, but Shunin took out his sword and refused to spare him. He swung his sword and blood gushed from the man's body, after which the other guys also knelt down and asked for his forgiveness. But the protagonist would not listen to them and swung his sword again, killing them. Ahu fell to the floor in fear and backed away, begging him not to kill them. But he smiled and told him not to worry. He wouldn't do that. He wanted to say something else, but suddenly the man stood up abruptly and ran to the exit. But unfortunately, he stepped on a banana peel that had been left there some time ago and slipped, hitting his head on the wall. Junin looked at him in shock and said that he just wanted to ask him to take him to the Sun family. He approached him and began kicking him, saying that if he survived, he would pay him 50 yen. He hit him on the head several times, asking him to wake up. But suddenly he noticed something and jerked back. And at that moment, a blade flew past his face and stuck into the wall. He looked at him in shock and thought that this was an ancient weapon technique. And if the man was not one of the awakened, then he must be some kind of ancient warrior. After that, 2 more blades flew at him, and he, noticing this, quickly ran to the side. But when he saw another blade flying straight at him, he thought that the man had predicted his actions. Waving his hand upward, he threw the blade away, and it stuck into the ceiling. And he thought that it seemed to him that there were 3 killers, and that these darts were poisonous. And he did not know where they were hiding as they were attacking him from behind. He decided to pull off the same trick he had at the festival and deliberately exposed himself to the blow, sending the blade into the void with the thought that he had to lure them out first. He pretended to lose consciousness and fell to the floor, after which the killers came out of their hiding place, and the old man said that the bastard had finally caught the dart. The main character's body was shaking, and he said that this guy was holding up well. He didn't even die from the dart. The man standing next to him grinned and said that he was on his last legs, and if they killed him, the Chin family would pay them $500,000 for it. After that, the men laughed loudly and were about to pounce on him, which he obviously did not expect and was very surprised. He began to get up. He smoothed his hair and stood up with a smirk, asking if he had scared them. He stepped on the man's foot, and the man cursed loudly, after which he did the same to the others, and took a dart out of his space, saying that they had just had some fun. So he wanted to have some fun too, but his skills weren't that good, so this was all he could do. He then demonstrated his skill by throwing the dart at them with such force that it whistled through the air. The men watched in horror and tried to dodge, but the darts were so fast that they couldn't do anything, and the sharp blades pierced their foreheads. The old man looked in shock at the bodies of his companions falling to the floor, and then fell himself. Gigi approached him menacingly and said that he was the lucky observer, and that perhaps he would take him to the Chin family. Meanwhile, Jilin was trying to call his subordinate and was already starting to worry. Hearing a noise outside the door, he hung up the phone and asked with a smile if they were really here. But contrary to his expectations, Shannon burst into the room without his subordinates, carrying the old man in his arms. Jilin was very surprised to see him kick down the door, and the main character, throwing the old man on the floor, asked if he didn't want to see him. He sat down on the table in front of him and asked what he thought when he saw him and if he was handsome. Jilin nervously replied that he was incomparable, but was he crazy, and did he even know who he was? Today he admits defeat, and what should he do to get him to let him go? Maybe he wants money. He has plenty of it. He was just a guy from a rich family, and if he killed him, he would get nothing out of it. If he let him live, he would guarantee that he would not pursue him. He smiled nervously and thought that this time he was lucky. Let him just wait for their master, and he would finish him off. Shannon asked if he could calm down and stop muttering, because they would wait for help together, and he also wanted to see what the Zhou family was like. At that moment, an old man named Zhou Fei entered the room and said that he was very capable, but he was unlikely to get out of this building alive today. The main character looked away and saw an old man standing in the doorway with an important look on his face. And the man from the future said that this was Zhou Fei, a tough nut to crack, and that he could hide from him. Before he could finish, the old man lunged forward and clenched his fist, but the main character prevented the blow and stopped him. Shannon from the future smiled awkwardly and said that it didn't matter anymore, and the main character thought that this old man was very strong and much stronger than the previous awakened ones he had fought. Zhou Fei said that he was really good, Not everyone could withstand a blow equal to a third of his strength, and he would definitely kill him. He rushed into the attack again, but the protagonist retreated with a serious expression and grabbed the old man's arm, surprising him. After that, he knocked him to the ground, causing cracks to appear on the floor. Jelen gave him a disapproving look, and Zhou Fei, getting to his feet, said that it was very interesting. He laughed loudly and tore off his outer clothing, while Gigi exclaimed in shock, asking what he was doing, since he wasn't going to attack a naked old man. His opponent's body began to glow with powerful energy, causing steam to appear around him. The smoke from his transformation filled the space, and the silhouette of the old man began to appear. His muscles increased in size, and now he was no longer the same frail old man. Shannon exclaimed, asking if this was his second form. He said that he had warned him from the future that he should hide. Jilin smiled and told him to kill this guy, while Zhou clenched his fist and asked with a smile if he wanted to hit him again. Gigi also smiled and replied that if he was hit, he would do the same. At that moment, the old man rushed to attack, and the main character, barely defending himself from the blow, thought that this was indeed his second form, and he became almost twice as strong. Zhou jumped up and bent his knee to strike, shouting that he wasn't done yet. Sheenan crossed his arms to protect his head, but the blow knocked his legs back. After that, the old man said with a smirk that the next blow would be to the solar plexus, and he moved sharply closer to him, striking him with his knee. The blow sent the protagonist flying into the wall, kicking up dust, and Jilin smiled and told the old man to tear off his head and bring it to him. But the protagonist was still full of strength. Getting to his feet, he asked the old man if he was following the rules of fair combat at all. Seeing this, Jilin hid behind Zhou in fear and exclaimed that he was still alive. The main character waved his hand, smiled, and suggested trying again, but this time fairly. Zhou became angry and rushed to attack, wishing him dead, then struck him, but Sheenan did the same in response. He grinned and thought that now he would slowly gain his strength from these 3 blows. The old man noticed the change in his aura and asked in surprise why he had the same energy as him. He tried to pull his hand away, but couldn't free himself from Sheenan's grip. And Jilin exclaimed, maybe he would finally kill him. Jovi became nervous and thought, can't this idiot see that he's not in the best position? At that moment, Jilin took a gun out of the box and, pointing it at GG, ordered him to quickly let go of his hand. He opened fire, and Shinan reacted quickly, pulling the old man's arm to the side. And using his body as a shield, several bullets pierced his back, and he cursed loudly, telling him not to shoot, and then fell to the floor. The hero remained unharmed. Obviously not expecting this, Jilin trembled with fear, while the old man tried to cope with the pain. The main character approached the young man, who fell to the floor in terror, and begged him not to kill him, and he raised his foot and replied with a smile that he would not do so. After that, he kicked Jilin, who, feeling intense pain, clenched his teeth and cried, screaming loudly. At that moment, the man watching this on camera furiously broke the edge of the table with his fingers and ordered them to turn it off. Shenyang's power had already reached the peak of the 2nd level, and now he was one of the strongest people at that level. He could not be allowed to become stronger. He had to be eliminated. The people around him knelt before him and, calling him the head of the family, replied that they understood everything. Soon, Gigi left the karaoke bar and slowly walked home, sipping soda, and then suddenly noticed someone behind him and turned sharply, throwing a glass at that person. Muling Q quickly stepped back so that the glass would not hit her and called out to him in a dissatisfied tone, asking what was wrong with him. He asked if she had lost her memory in her old age and if she had really forgotten how she had deceived him. She smiled and asked if he was still offended. She came closer and, swaying her hips slightly, asked if he would punish her by turning her back to him. He shyly stepped back and exclaimed that she was talking nonsense. She herself felt awkward and got angry, asking if he wanted to die, thinking that if the organization loved him so much, she wouldn't have tried so hard for him. She said that the gangster's refusal to pay at the store was actually staged, and Jilin was used to test his strength. The recording of the fight with that man was sent to the top of the Chen family, and they were already thinking about what to do with him. The head of the Chen family is ruthless. He even used his son, and this time they are going to act as a family, so he is in danger, and he can cooperate with them because he cannot cope alone. His face contorted with hostility, and he asked if they were doing anything useful. She replied that she understands he doesn't believe them, but she is telling the truth. Their family will find his weak spots. then strike them and kill him. Right now, they were gathering strength and might use less than optimal methods. They could see right through him. He asked how they proposed to cooperate. She replied that it was very simple. They would force the Chen family to act quickly and carelessly. The main character thought that it seemed like they had some problems between themselves, but they were afraid to deal with them themselves and wanted to use him as a weapon. He agreed and said he wanted something that could prove their words. She was delighted and asked what he wanted. His eyes flashed, and he said he wanted their people to behead the leader of the Chen family. These words made her nervous, and he thought that their goal was not to expose the Chen family, but to use him to destroy them, and whether they could make a deal that would satisfy both his and their conditions. She replied that they would never agree to such a thing. Hearing this, he turned around and went home, saying that there was nothing to talk about then. The next day, he returned to the karaoke bar, but this time he was prepared. He looked at the huge sign and thought that she was telling the truth, that people from a huge family were going to kill him, so he was in danger, but he would force them to act rashly. He took a spray can out of his bag, then walked up to the door and painted a circle on it. The guards immediately ran up to him and shouted, asking who he was and what word he had written there. Another guard approached him and, calling him boss, whispered that the word was break. The guard exclaimed that he didn't care what the word was. Shinan interrupted them and said that the door was in his way, so he was going to break it. The security chief gritted his teeth in anger and looked at him, asking if he was the bravest one there. He called his colleague Wang Meng and ordered him to teach him a lesson. Wang Meng jumped out of the crowd of guards and raised a pipe above his head to hit Gigi, but the latter stopped it with a single finger. The pipe flew out of the guard's hands and he felt himself in confusion, asking where his stick was. A karaoke employee ran up to them and called the head of security, then whispered that it was Shinan, one of the best awakened ones, who had killed Jilin, so they should be careful. The chief asked why he hadn't told him earlier. Wang Meng overheard their conversation, then turned to Shinan and exclaimed with excitement in his eyes, "Are you the great man who killed Jilin?" He took out an axe from somewhere and asked if he should break down the door. He would do it right now. The security chief became nervous and asked if he had gone mad. Wang Meng gave him a threatening look and said with a grim expression that he would break it down. This frightened the security chief so much that he fell to the floor, while Wang Meng began to hit the door with an axe. And Gigi stepped aside, wondering if this was coercion, but he did not use all his strength. After finishing with the door, a sweaty Wang Meng smiled at him and asked if he needed anything else. The main character smiled and, pointing to himself, asked if he could go with him. He happily agreed, then threw his cap at his boss's feet, saying that was enough. And Shinan walked away from the karaoke building and waved his hand, saying that they would go to another place. Wang Meng ran up to him and asked if he knew why he was following him, because he admired him and his strength. In fact, Jilin had done a lot of bad things. He had heard that he had even killed his older sister, and it was high time to finish him off, but they could find his family, so he kept quiet. Gigi said that if he followed him, he would be in danger because he had killed Shin Jr. He was not afraid of that. He smiled confidently, pounded his chest with his fist, and replied that he was not afraid because he was very strong. And besides, if the Qin family was hunting him, it meant that he was under someone's protection. The main character replied that, to his disappointment, no one was protecting him. But Wang Meng was even more delighted and said that since he had no support and was going against the Qin family alone, it meant he was very strong, so he should definitely go after him. Shinan laughed awkwardly and received a call from squad commander Ahao, who said that today was the alumni reunion, and everyone hoped he would come since he was free and he had heard that everything was going well for him now. The main character replied that he wasn't interested and hung up, after which he saw a voice message from Zhou Wan in his messenger. He turned it on and heard that this alumni meeting had been convened by order of Zhang Wei, and he doesn't know what connections this guy has, but he has money and influence, so he can't refuse him, plus Lu Jing will be with him too, and he has a conflict with them. He found him and said he wanted to make peace, and he didn't want to contradict him, so he wanted to invite him to a meeting in the VIP room of the Emperor Hotel. He would come, right? Hearing this, Gigi was very surprised and, thinking about the names mentioned in the message, clenched his fist in anger. He remembered seeing Zhang Wei pin Lu Jing against the wall and saying that it was just a kiss. Why was she crying? And if she continued to cry, he would start to behave badly. Shinan quickly approached them and grabbed his arm, telling him to apologize to her quickly, or else he would be in trouble. Zhang Wei asked irritably who the hell he was. At that moment, the principal approached them and called out to Shannon, asking what he was doing since he was hitting his classmates. He replied that he was harassing Lu Jing, and Zhang Wei called the principal grandpa and asked him for help. The principal turned to the girl and asked if he had really been harassing her, and she replied fearfully that he hadn't. Gigi's face darkened with anger, and he smirked, thinking that this was why he had been expelled back then, because she had disagreed with him and then started dating him. Now, of course, the two of them had set this up to humiliate him, but he would see if they could do it. Wang Meng asked if he would go to the alumni meeting. By the way, the Emperor Hotel belongs to the Chun family. The main character smiled and said that they would go there right away. After a while, they arrived at the hotel, and he asked his companion to wait for him outside, and the latter saluted him and replied that he understood. He entered the hotel, climbed the stairs to the second floor, and saw a crowd of friends chatting happily with each other at the end of the corridor. Noticing him, Zhou Wang was delighted and wanted to call out, but Zhang Wei stopped him. The hotel manager, whose surname was Zhou, politely blocked the protagonist's path and also apologized to him, saying that this was the VIP floor, where only important people were allowed. Zhang Wei smiled and said that it turned out that Chen Ning couldn't pass. Everyone else laughed, and the manager, upon hearing that name, immediately bowed to Gigi and greeted him. The guys were very surprised by this, after which one of them approached the manager and asked if ordinary participants could be here, not just the elite. The manager wanted to say who he was, but Chanine gave him a menacing look, and he also shut his mouth. The guy smiled nervously and said that he hadn't seen Chanine on the list of VIPs at the Emperor Hotel, and maybe he could show her his membership card, or maybe he had stolen it. The main character turned to him and asked if he was a security guard. These words angered the guy, but Lujin smiled and greeted her old friend, saying that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, but he was still the same. He asked if she was currently dating Zhang Wei, which was so unexpected. Her boyfriend sighed discontentedly and she frowned, and her face darkened. At that moment, a hotel employee approached the manager and said that this person was not on the VIP member list, and he whispered, asking if she had even read the official announcement in the group, because he had single-handedly dealt with that star from the karaoke club. After that, all the graduates gathered around a round table, and Zhang Wei, spreading his arms wide, told Chen Ying that he was his guest today, so he would treat him. The girls opened the menu, and one of them said to her friend that it was so expensive here, and Gigi, hearing this, snatched the menu from their hands and asked if they could choose. Then he would order, since Zhang Wei was treating them. 2 servings of abalone, 1 for each of them, Australian shrimp, caviar, and sashimi. Zhang Wei trembled with anger and, forcing a smile, said that Chen Ning seemed to be having a great time ordering such expensive dishes. Chen Nin replied that he wasn't having as much fun as Zhang Wei and that he usually couldn't afford such expensive dishes, but since Zhang Wei had invited him to eat, he couldn't refuse. But judging by the look on his face, he couldn't afford it, so he should go eat at a roadside diner. His old friend smiled nervously and replied that it was nothing, and he was happy if his classmates enjoyed a delicious meal. But then he remembered that he had been in good physical shape at school, and he himself had only recently started boxing, so maybe they could train together if he wasn't afraid. Lujin didn't like this suggestion and said anxiously that they were classmates. Zhou Wang agreed and said that they rarely got together anyway, and now he was going to do something like this. The guy sitting next to him said that his friend couldn't really hurt Qinying, so what was he so afraid of? The main character asked Zhang Wei if he really decided to beat him up after he decided to order expensive delicacies, or if he wanted him to fight him and his henchmen, and who the hell he was. Zhang Wei's friend got angry and exclaimed, "Are you tired of living?" His friend stopped him and said that Shinin was too cocky, but they would test him. He took off his jacket and threw it on a chair, then showed everyone his muscles, and one of his classmates said that he had bulked up thanks to training, and Chen Ning would be in trouble. Zhang Wei rushed to attack and told his opponent to get hit in the face, but as soon as he got close, the main character turned his head to the side and struck back, causing him to grab his head and retreat. Chen Ying pretended he didn't mean to do that and asked anxiously what was wrong with him and why he was hitting him right in the face. Zhang Wei broke away and lunged at him again, clenching his fist. But the protagonist was quicker and struck him again, causing his opponent to bleed from the nose and fall to the floor. The main character was frightened and exclaimed, asking if he wanted him to pay for the moral damage, because he didn't have the money to pay his bills. Meanwhile, his classmates began whispering, asking what was wrong with him, why he always lost, and whether his face was made of iron. Jung Wei wiped the blood from his face and gritted his teeth, thinking that this guy's strength was 100 times greater than his own, and that he would lose all his reputation. The main character shrugged and said he didn't have time to eat, so he would leave early, otherwise he would run into Jung Wei's grandfather. At that moment, Wan Ming called him, and he answered the call. He heard his exhausted voice telling him to leave quickly, as a member of the Chen family was already there. Chenin became nervous and used his heightened perception to see what was happening outside. The beaten Wan Ming sat by the wrecked car, holding the phone to his ear, his face covered in bruises. At that moment, his perception was suddenly distracted by a sharp burst of energy. Chen Ziliang burst into the room, and Zhang Wei exclaimed, "Who the hell was he?" thinking that he had arrived just in time, as he was about to embarrass himself. The former soldier looked at him with a smirk and told him to get out of there. But Zhang Wei became very angry and attacked him. But he didn't have time to do anything. Ziliang kicked him in the stomach and threw him aside, causing him to hit the wall and slowly slid down it to the floor. His friends called out to him anxiously, while Gigi nervously looked at the former soldier, wondering where he got so much of strength. He noticed his glowing red eyes, and the man said that because of him, he had been kicked out of the army and had killed his brother, so now he would send him to the other world. He reached out his hand toward the main character, which frightened him, and he quickly jumped aside, thinking that he was fast. He wanted to strike, but his opponent's silhouette blurred before his eyes, and he wondered what was going on. Zillion appeared behind him in an instant and struck a blow, which Shunan barely managed to defend against. His feet slid back across the floor, and he wondered in surprise if his physical strength and speed had increased several times over, and what had happened. The future him replied that it seemed like he had taken some kind of potion. Zillion said that he was indeed talented, so he would get straight to the point. His muscles suddenly increased in size, causing his shirt to tear, and he exclaimed that he would kill him. The main character thought that not only had his strength increased, but his body had also undergone changes. Zillion stood before him shirtless, his body covered in bright energy. Shunan thought there was nothing to fear and let him continue. Zillion rushed forward and ordered him to die. He hit the main character in the face. The protagonist grabbed his jaw and said that, of course, there was nothing to fear. His second personality grinned and said that such blows would not leave bruises on him, because this guy was weaker than him, and he should look at him. Ziliang wiped his mouth with his hand, and Shunan said that although his strength and speed had improved, his defense was still mediocre, and he needed to be hit in the forehead. Ziliang hit him in the chest, and the main character hit him in the stomach with his knee. He straightened his leg, and the guy was thrown back. Junin pushed himself off the floor and quickly rushed towards Ziliang. He grabbed Lu Jin, and she screamed. Ziliang squeezed his hand around her neck and said that, okay, he would admit that he had won, but his friends were there, and if he didn't surrender, he would kill them. Lu Jin fearfully asked Shunan for help. The main character replied that he didn't even know her, and if he wanted to kill him, let him kill him, or could he only fight with hostages? Lu Jin said in a trembling voice that he was a monster. Shunan waved his hand sharply and threw a dart into Zilang's body. The girl broke free from his arms and rushed into the main character's embrace with a cry. He grabbed her face and ordered her to get out of there, and Zhou Wang to take his classmates and leave. Lu Jin spun around questioningly, and Zhou Wang said they would leave immediately. Zillion lay next to the cracked wall. He frowned and looked down, remembering Qin Lo Hai's words to Ziliang that his brother was dead. Their business had gone downhill, and Shunan was to blame for all of it. There were almost no talented fighters left in the family, so he wanted him to deal with Shunan. Zillion asked in confusion, "Him? But he's not even a fighter." Qin Hai looked at him intently and said that it was a substance that had been invented recently, and it could significantly increase his body and strength. He handed him a pack of pills and said that he only needed to land a few blows, and he would finish off Junin with his methods, and he would support him. True, the substance has some side effects, but if he manages to complete the task, he will give him a large share of their family business. At that moment, he looked at the pack of pills and quickly poured them into his mouth. The main character looked at him in confusion, and he clutched his heart and cried out in pain. His body grew, and Shunan fearfully thought that he had become even bigger. Yilim barely got up, and then flashed his red eyes and ordered him to die. He moved so fast that it seemed as if he had simply disappeared. And the main character asked in fear, "What?" Suddenly, he hit him on the back of the head, and blood gushed from his mouth. Shunin clenched his fist and shouted angrily that he was an idiot, but he missed. And Jilin hit him in the back. The protagonist wanted to run around him, when suddenly he was kicked, sending him flying high into the air. Junin frowned and thought that he was too fast. He couldn't predict his actions or even strike back. Energy waves appeared around him. He clenched his jaw and thought, "Shunin from the future, hurry up and find a way to defeat him, or he will die soon." The main character clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction and thought that he would have to rely on himself. He grabbed his sword and ordered an attack. A large energy field appeared around him. Jilin rushed forward and ordered him to die. He hit the barrier and flew back. The main character smiled and thought, "Let him try." And rays of light immediately fell on the enemy. The energy beams began to tear apart Jillian's body, and he screamed loudly. He looked to the side with a beastly gaze, spread his arms and shouted, "Let him die." Shun's barrier broke from the impact, and he was thrown far back. The main character almost hit himself with his sword from the fall, but he held it in his mind. He was at the peak of the second level, but after eating those pills, he moved on to the third, how to fight him. At that moment, Shuning from the future appeared and asked in surprise. He had only gone to take a nap, and the situation had already changed so much. What had happened? The main character replied discontentedly that while he was walking and napping, he almost died, and let him quickly find a way to deal with him. Junin from the future smiled and said to try to stun him so that he couldn't fight back. The main character shouted in dissatisfaction, asking what he was talking about, and told him to try to lull him to sleep with a lullaby. Junin replied no, his singing would make his ears wilt, and thought that the Chin family was watching their battle, so all the cameras needed to be turned off. The main character rushed forward and began smashing the cameras, one by one with small stones. Jilin approached him from behind and grabbed him by the shirt. Junin thought this was bad. He spun him around and threw him against the wall. At that moment, the man was sitting on a chair and talking, so Shunin guessed. The effect of this drug won't last forever. We need to take him home before it's too late, and he starts to go crazy. They knew they had to kill this guy this time, but let him try not to resort to using that thing. The guy listened to him carefully and replied that he understood, boss. The man stood up, folded his arms behind his back, and told his colleagues to kill him in order. Suddenly, a faint smoke began to spread across the floor of the fight. Jilin looked at him questioningly, and the main character grinned and said that was great. The cameras were broken. He looked around and said that they were coming, so he should get ready. The light figure said that they had been ready for a long time, and that she would kill the guy hiding in the corner, and that he should get ready. Jilin looked around in confusion. At that moment, the guy appeared next to him with a knife in his hand, and Gigi shouted, asking what was going on, whether this was the guy who had tried to kill him with knives last time. Shunin looked around and said in horror that it was indeed them, and where had the girl gone? He trembled with fear and said that one day he would find her and take revenge. Jilin began to attack, and the guy suddenly jumped up. The main character looked at this in surprise and said that the speed of the guy from the Soon family had slowed down significantly. So that was the reason. The pills he had taken were poison. He raised his hand to his chin, and his consciousness from the future said, did he really enjoy pretending to be weak? And why was he bleeding? Had he done it on purpose, since he had only been attacked by a third-level seed? The main character smiled and asked how he thought his acting was. Shunen folded his arms across his chest and replied that it was not bad, just like him back then. At that moment, the guy was standing on the roof of the house and said that help had indeed arrived. He looked through his binoculars and said that they needed to get him out urgently and that he needed to report to his superiors. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he was hit in the cheek. The guy looked around in confusion and shouted that it was an invisible man from the Dark Clan and that they shouldn't even think about disrupting the Shun family's plans. The voice replied that he was not invisible. The guy was hit in the face again. The voice said that they were useless. The guy started waving his knife around and thought that enough was enough, that he would kill him, and why did they even decide to interfere? He grabbed his cheek, looked to the side, and thought that they had arrived. People in dark masks were standing below. A second later, they had already entered the building. The guy realizes that the mysterious shadow organization has finally begun its active operations. The young man urges everyone to hurry up and immediately rescue their mentor, Zelen. The ninjas continue on their way when suddenly something happens. An unexpected, menacing voice demands an explanation from them as to who gave them permission to leave this place. And a wave of fire immediately swept past the fighters. The man introduces himself as the grandfather of one of those present, answering the question that has been asked. The same character orders the whole group to stay where they are in an authoritative tone, and then sends fire at them. Immediately, one of the opponents uses his ice ability called Freezer. The guy notes the ice type of attack with surprise, and one of the girls mocks the weakness of the enemy's fire attack. And immediately, an ice charge from the girls flies at the guy. But the guy immediately finds a way to deflect the ice with his fire. The main character thinks contemptuously of his opponent, who imagines himself to be invincible. Now the young man must fight his sworn enemy, who possesses icy powers. Immediately, a huge group of ninjas followed him. The man declares with a cold smile that now he will play with this group. This unexpected alliance with the Shadow Organization clearly exceeded Chen Long's expectations. To be so cocky as to fight 10-second level experts alone, the blue-haired girl was curious about Shen An's connection to the woman from that dark organization. At that moment, the guy on the other roof was being beaten up. His opponent shouted furiously that any distraction in battle would inevitably lead to death, and the boy's body contorted again. It was the girl from their dark organization. The action resumed. The estate and GG drew their swords, provoking everyone to attack him at once. But the bald man made a direct accusation that Shen An had conspired with the Shadow Organization. They advised him to stop before it was too late, calling his allies a cruel organization. The guy parries, reminding them of the madness and murders of Chen Zilan, who took forbidden pills. In response to his words, his opponent cold-bloodedly sentences him to death. He also attacks the main character. Meanwhile, the ninja nearby activates the wind for their duel and launched 2 tornadoes straight at the protagonist. The protagonist barely manages to stay on his feet. The opponent, meanwhile, demonstrated an instant 5-fold increase in his combat power, and each of them was full of strength. But the main character was no slouch either. He also activated his energy, and a fierce battle began. The ninja was shocked when it embraced him. He could feel how much our main character's aura and strength had increased. But the ninja girl immediately activated the collapse of the earth, and the ground beneath the hero's feet completely collapsed. And in order not to fall inside, the hero jumped very high. He was shocked because someone had activated increased gravity, and immediately pinned him to the floor, slowly covering the main character's body with the remains of the floor. After a while, Wei Wei raised her head and said Shunyan's name. The boss stood next to her and asked her to wait, saying that they needed to see more. Sadness flashed in her eyes, and the masked guy said that he was finally dead. The girl approached him, folded her arms, and said that this guy was certainly strong, but they had outnumbered him. Ubludak told them to go, as they would help the master. Dushi gripped the handle of his knife and thought that things were bad. After a while, Su Yuan looked at the broken stones and thought that his energy was no longer felt. He spread the energy of fire and said discontentedly that this fool was too reckless. How could he die like that? Mu Lingqiu shouted that they were retreating. The energy of fire spread everywhere, and the boys began to scatter. At that moment, the main character imagined himself drowning in a bottomless pond. He thought he needed to concentrate and free his heart from all worries, because Junin was too confident in his talent. The main character sank lower and lower, thinking with his eyes closed. His body was covered with energy, and he thought that the power of the dragon lightning would allow him to use his power, and quickly spun the weapon in his hands. At that moment, the masked man turned around in confusion and looked at the crumbling stones. His eyes widened in fear, and a huge stream of energy appeared from under the ground. The guy's body was thrown into the air and he screamed loudly. Everyone stood in shock next to the energy. Junin jumped out and, clutching the hilt of his sword, said joyfully, "Here it is!" The chief of staff and Wei Wei looked at this in surprise. Mu Lingqiu, Su Yuan, and Dusi turned around and froze. Dusi asked if he needed any more help, to which Mu Lingqiu replied that no, he could handle it alone. While he deals with the mercenaries from the Sun family, they will take care of Chen Lu and Hai. A huge gust of wind was directed at the main character. He smirked and asked if that was all he had. Just the power of the wind. The masked man looked ahead in fear, and the main character's weapon had already appeared in front of him. A powerful blow followed, leaving behind purple lightning bolts. He screamed loudly and fell to the floor. The masked man shouted about a 5-fold increase in power, but suddenly he fell to the floor, and the others asked in confusion what had happened. Huyan shouted forward. The team members in black masks jumped up and shouted freeze. Conclusion. Shunin laughed and ordered the attack. After a while, loud cries of "Kill us!" and pleas for mercy rang out from the Sun family residence by the large pond. The men stood on the floor and begged not to be killed, promising to leave the Sun family, and some even offered to reveal their weaknesses. Mulinkyu waved her hand and ordered them to leave. The subordinates quickly ran away, when suddenly they were struck by a swift sword movement. Chenlu and Hai wiped the sword and said that they were a bunch of weaklings unworthy of life. He ran his hand along the blade of the sword and said that he was old, and his body was no longer as agile. When the world began to change, he went into hiding. He waited for someone capable of going against the Shun family to appear in the world, and thought it would be Shunin. He stepped forward, filled with energy, and said it was a pity that now she, the dark group, stood in his place. Let them kill her first, and then go and finish him off. Mulinkyu cried out in fear, saying no, he was third level. Third. Chenlu and Hai swung their swords and looked at her with displeasure. At that moment, Shunin was in a large building. The members of the dark group looked at him in fear and said that he was a monster, just a monster. He took out a gun and pointed it forward. Weiwei looked at him and said that this gun seemed to be made of a special wood that grew in the western suburbs, and it seemed to have been made by the Sun family. The boss raised his hand to his chin and said that even if they only looked superficially, they would already have learned many secrets and hidden strengths of the Sun family. He ordered them to watch. A member of the dark group fired a shot, and the main character swung his sword, cutting the bullet in half. The guy looked at him in fear and fired a couple more shots. Shunin parried the attacks with his sword again. The member of the dark group cried out in fear, "No!" He tried to crawl away from the protagonist's ominous aura. The main character cut his gun in half and said with a smile that he had improved, and his sword skills had become much better. Huyan took a scroll out of his breast pocket and said that Xunyan had asked for it himself. He scattered pollen everywhere and ordered him to die. The main character reached out and asked what it was. The bodies of the dark group members were covered with pollen, and they screamed in fear that they were doomed. Their bodies began to bend strangely, and their eyes turned white. The main character looked at them and thought that it was a virus and that they were infected, and that Junlu and Hai were to blame for everything. His image from the future said that Junin must stop them, as they had turned into zombies. Their bodies were now just pieces of meat, and their blood was contagious, and if he didn't cure them in time, the entire city of Kijen would perish. The main character began to exhale energy air. A loud cry rang out, and the question arose of how long they would continue to watch, because there were infected people there, and if they were not cured in time, their city would perish. The chief replied that he was right, and if they didn't stop it. Weiwei pushed off and flew down, throwing her arms back. The military entered the building and said that they had also come, and that this went beyond the Qin family's conflict with him, and if the virus spread, the Qin family would become the enemy of all humanity. Weiwei stood in front of the team. The zombies began to emerge from the shadows. Weiwei shouted for them to be careful as the virus was transmitted through blood. A zombie approached her, and she hit it with all her might. The body flew backward. Weiwei grabbed the zombie girl and threw her to the ground, breaking the asphalt. The guys behind her watched happily. They said that this girl was so cruel and cocky, and that was just his type. The battle with the zombies began, and the guys from Weiwei's team tried to fight them off. The zombie bit the guy's arm, and he became covered in blue veins, becoming one of them. The guy screamed that it was a nightmare. The girl looked at it in fear and screamed that, oh no, he was now infected. The main character swung his sword and struck them. He shouted for everyone to be careful, as the virus is transmitted through blood, and they would turn into zombies in a second. The bodies of the guys were covered with energy threads. Weiwei rushed forward and began striking the members of the dark group. The zombies' bodies fell to the ground. Mr. Chudong, a member of the Chu family, approached them. He said that it seemed that ordinary blows did not kill them, and many mercenaries were infected, so things were bad. Shonen froze in surprise and thought, how could he have forgotten about this? It seemed he had the means to win. He raised 2 fingers and thought about the fire of Mount Wanyuan. The zombies' bodies immediately burst into flames, and the main character smiled as he watched them dissolve into it. The guy exclaimed in surprise that this guy not only had the power of fire, but he could handle it better than the other guy. The other asked how many more tricks he had up his sleeve. Weiwei shouted in displeasure, asking if he wanted to burn her alive. Junen looked at her and replied that someone had just spent half a day watching him without helping. So he set her clothes on fire, and this was moral compensation. Wei Wei turned around and shouted Shunen's name in displeasure. Half an hour later, the fire was dying down. Junen and Wei Wei stood next to it. The main character turned away, and she asked where he was going. He replied that he was going to see if the old man from the Chu family was dead, and he wanted to make sure of it himself, and that she should stay there for now. Wei Wei folded her arms across her chest and thought that he was worried about the people from the dark group. The team members followed him and told him not to fall behind, because that guy must have gone to the Qin family's house. After a while, at the residence of the Qin, Dusi and Suyun were lying on the steps. Mu Lingqiu lay on the floor, breathing heavily. Shunlun Hai waved his sword and said that there was chaos in the dark group, and that they should train more in their next life. He released a stream of energy, and Mu Lingqiu thought, is this really the end? She closed her eyes and a tear rolled down her cheek. She thought she didn't want to die like this. Mu Lingqiu wondered why nothing hurt, and standing with her eyes closed, she asked if she was dead or if it was a dream. Mu Lingqiu opened her eyes and saw the main character in front of her, who asked if she knew that she had to pinch herself to check if it was a dream. Junlun Hai said that he was not afraid of his sword, so be brave. He grinned and said that it was not in vain that he had been watching him for so long, Shunlin. The main character smiled and asked if that meant he already knew everything about him, even better than his mother. Junlun Hai laughed loudly and said that he knew a lot about him, and despite his young age, he had already achieved a lot in such a short period of time, from a talentless person to a person with third-level power, which was impressive. She asked in surprise if he was third level. Mu Lingqiu froze with her mouth half open. The members of Wei Wei's team peeked out from behind the door and asked if Xun Lin was really third level and what kind of power he had. The main character smiled and said that he knew a lot. Junlun Hai said that Xun Lin admired him very much, and his power gives him no peace. But he swung his sword and shouted that it was the end for him. Xun Lin replied that even though he knew a lot about him, he would still die. He thrust his sword forward and blocked Xunlun Hai's attack. Xunlin smiled and asked if he thought he was strong, because in his eyes he was nothing. He swung his sword and threw him back. The main character shouted that he was a nobody, allowing his own son to take a banned substance, and that he deserved to die. Xunlun Hai put his hand forward, and the upper layer was torn off by the blows, revealing an iron hand. Xunlin asked in confusion what it was. The Winter Soldier, because the Winter Soldier is a comic book character. He waved his weapon again and shouted that it didn't matter. Xunlun Hai put his hands out in front of him, crossed them, and asked what. The main character struck him several times and he crashed into the wall. Xunlun Hai cried out in horror, dissatisfied that he was too close. He covered his head with his hands and, breaking through the wall, rushed forward. Xunlin looked after him and asked if he was going to run away. He threw his sword at his back, and it stuck near his feet. Xunlun Hai turned around, frowned, and uttered the name of the main character. He grabbed his sword, shouted, dropped his blade, and laughed. The main character grabbed his hand and asked if he had not been told that his blade was forbidden to touch. At that moment, Xunlun Hai's hand was exposed and the metal frame bent. He cried out in pain, lowered his head, and uttered the name of Xun Ling. Xunlun Hai took the pill and brought it to his mouth. He ate it and was filled with energy. The main character's thoughts and confusion were interrupted by the restoration of his hand. Xunlun Hai said he didn't want to use it, but the other guy forced him to. He rushed forward and kicked up dust. The members of Wei Wei's team cried out in fear that the old fool Xun had used a banned substance, and if he got angry, they would be finished, and that Xun Lin should be careful. Junlun Hai stretched out his metal arm, and the main character said that he only had brute strength. He looked at him with displeasure, and Xun Lin squeezed his hand around his neck. He said that he had ordered his henchmen to spray the virus, but even that was useless. The main character ordered him to die. He swung his leg and kicked him. He pinned him to the floor. The guy said in surprise that he was so strong and wondered if he was human. At that moment, Su Tianming stepped forward and said that his name was Su Tianming, and he represented the pharmaceutical company, Sicheng. It was a pleasure to meet them. The guys frowned and thought that they needed to get to know him quickly, and if they got to know him, he could help them in the future. The main character turned around and asked if they were really that happy. Su Tianming replied puzzledly, "Well, it's just that." At that moment, Chu Donghuang stepped forward and said that Mr. Sun was the father of Chu Yusi, Chu Donghuang. The main character turned around and said happily, "Hello, Uncle Chu. I know Yusi, and when I have time, I will definitely visit them with Yusi." Chu Donghuang smiled, nodded his head, and said that was great. He thought that if Xun Lin was on their side, it would help their family become the mayor of Yincheng City. The boys stood behind them and looked at them in surprise. They said that it seemed like Xun Lin wasn't interested in them. He only paid attention to the old man Chu. So did that mean he wanted to win their trust? Chu Donghuang turned around and asked if Xun Lin's power could be worse than theirs, because he had the power to become mayor. Mu Lingqiu followed the protagonist and said Xun Lin's name. He turned around and asked if she had come to say thank you because it was nothing more than simple cooperation. He had previously thought that they would not have it, but it turned out that she had agreed to help him, which meant he had to reciprocate. Mu Lingqiu said thank you, and if he needed anything in the future. Junlin turned around and interrupted her, saying that maybe she wanted to join forces. His assistant from the future thought it was a good idea. It was high time they joined forces. Du Xun put his hand to his head and said that as long as he guaranteed that the dark group would not hunt him down, he was willing to join his team. Su Yan said, "Mr. Xun, can we finish this together?" Junlin replied, "Okay, I respect your decision and hope you won't regret taking him with you." He looked at Mu Lingqiu and asked what about her. She remained silent, then looked up at him and said that it was fine. She would go with them, but the dark group would not leave him alone, and when the time came, would Xun Lin protect her? The main character replied that of course he would, and that she would not regret agreeing to go with him. 3 days later, Mu Lingqiu said, "Boss, here is the information about the Xun family's inheritance. Let him take a look. Now everything is at his disposal." The main character turned around and told her to figure it out herself, and if anything, to call Wang Meng for help, as he needed to go to the abandoned house of the Sun family, and they would meet there. Mu Lingqiu shouted that she was his secretary, and this was annoying. The main character pursed his lips and walked forward. After a while, he went down to the basement and asked in surprise if it was really a secret room. He thought about it. Yes, he had discovered it by accident, but he had only seen it from the outside, so he couldn't get a complete picture in his head. And it seemed to him that before he died, he had looked in that direction, trying to understand what this thing was for. Xunlin pulled the lever and asked what they had there. Light illuminated the entire room with a large beam. The main character from the future said that it was a column made of sealing stone. He did not expect that the seal really belonged to the Sun family. The sealing stone pillars guard this world, and if the seal is removed, places that ordinary people should not see will be revealed to the world, such as the lake they had seen before. The seal had been removed and it had appeared. Junlin asked why it was just a lake and not, for example, a new piece of land. The image replied that this was because the seal had only been removed from a small area of territory. If the seal were to be removed from a huge area, he feared that a huge chunk of the world would be destroyed, and many people would suffer, and even the Zun family would not be able to help them. The main character replied that, wow, and what should they do with this seal? Remove it or not? Xunlin from the future replied that not yet. He didn't have enough strength, and in fact, before removing the seal, he needed to prepare and find several important items, and that for now it was better for him to return to his role as boss. The main character said wearily that no, it was too tiring. After a while, he asked why she had come. Mu Lingqiu pointed to the side and replied that this gentleman said it was very urgent, so she brought him there. Su Tianming smiled and said that it was a pleasure to meet Mr. Xun. His name was Su Tianming, and he was from the Jicheng Pharmaceutical Company. The protagonist shook his hand and said that it so happened that their company and the Zun family had a long history of cooperation. Su Tianming replied that he understood that pharmacies in the city sold their medicines, and that they really did not want to end their business relationship. Xunlin looked at him with dissatisfaction and asked if this was a threat. Su Tianming replied that no, Mr. Xun, it was not a threat at all. He had simply come to tell them about the potential of their pharmaceutical company, Jicheng. The main character turned around and said that he could tell Mr. Mu about it. He waved his hand and said good luck. Su Tianming handed him his business card and said, Mr. Xun, he hoped they would meet again. Xunlin took the card and said that Madame Mu should see their guest out. 10 minutes later, the protagonist asked who he thought he was. Mu Lingqiu replied that he must be awakened, but she couldn't say anything about his level of power. And what did the boss think? The main character replied that he was almost at the 3rd level and that he was not so simple. Mu Lingqiu asked in surprise if he was really that strong. Xunlin replied that she needed to find out what he meant by cooperation between them and his company, as well as the Xun family. Mu Lingqiu replied that she understood. After a while, the main character held a mug in his hand and asked if there was any news. Mu-Ling-Q replied that the boss was right. Ji-Cheng's company was producing illegal drugs in cooperation with Chen, and while some were doing the necessary work, others were covering for them and establishing the necessary connections. The factory where all this was produced was located in a village in the north, and she had also sent Du Si to scout the situation without his consent, so he shouldn't be angry. Shunlin replied that she was a good girl and that she should grab him and they would go there together. At that moment, there was an explosion at the factory in the village in the north. Du Si screamed in fear at how quickly it happened. At that moment, people were lying inside the factory, and everything around them was starting to burn. Everything caught fire quickly, and the man thought, "This is it." He climbed out of the window, and Du Si shouted for him to stop. The guy stopped, and Du Si looked at his back in confusion. The man clenched his fist, turned around, and grabbed Du Si, who yelled for him to lie down. He thought that was bad. The energy began to spread through Du Si's body. He pressed his hand against the boy's body, and the guy threw him back. Du Si fell to the ground and thought that this man couldn't be stronger than Mu-Ling-Q, so he needed to stall for time in the hope that Chen and the others would arrive as soon as possible. He took out a knife and headed towards the man. Du Si jumped up and shouted that he would not run away. The guy turned around and told him to die. At that moment, the car stopped, and the main character told the girl to wait outside and not approach anyone without his orders. He entered the factory and used absorption. All the energies mixed together very beautifully, and the fire began to diminish. Everything was extinguished, and Mu-Ling-Q wondered how he had extinguished it in a second. The main character approached her, held out a napkin, and told her to look at it. Mu-Ling-Q asked in surprise what it was. Chen replied that he had found this powder in the ashes, and it was not yet clear what it was made of, so he would take it for analysis. He sniffed it and said that it might be the drug. Mu-Ling-Q turned around and said that she knew more about this, and we should let him see it and let him go there. The main character began to spread his energy and said that he sensed an awakened second level there, and that she should find him, as he might be in danger. Mu-Ling-Q turned around in fear and ran forward. She said he was there and pointed somewhere in the bushes. He was lying in the bushes, blood dripping from his mouth. Shannon crouched down next to him and said that he was seriously injured but still alive. He opened his eyes and said, "Boss, I was holding back, but I let go, and I ask you not to be angry." The main character replied that it was okay, but first they needed to treat him and asked what he looked like. He replied that he was wearing black clothes and a scarf and asked about his abilities. Shannon reached out to his face and he said fearfully, "Boss." Mu-Ling-Q turned away and sighed. Suddenly a voice thanked the boss. Mu-Ling-Q turned around questioningly. The main character said to try not to talk too much. His organs were damaged. He would patch him up now, and when they got home, they would discuss everything. He cried, pursed his lips, and thought that when he served in the dark group, they swore to execute him for failing to fulfill his duties. But Chief Chen not only did not scold him, but also healed his wounds. Mu-Ling-Q smiled and approached them. The main character said that they urgently needed to find out who it was, and Madame Wu needed to keep an eye on the actions of the Sichuan Pharmaceutical Company, paying particular attention to Su Tianmin, and to be careful. Mu-Ling-Q replied that she would. After a while, the man in the black hood approached the house in the mountains, took off his mask and said, "Boss." The man turned out to be Su Yuan. He said that the task had been completed. The masked man stood in the shadows and replied that he had taken too long this time, and that he had been doing it for so long. Su Yuan replied that he had encountered her, but had not used his abilities, so she did not recognize him. The man replied that he hadn't expected to meet her, and that it was okay. They could leave, but they needed to lie low for now. Su Yuan replied that he understood. The man took his phone and stepped into the shadows. He twirled it in his hands. Then he threw the phone aside and it exploded. He left the house, and it exploded too. At that moment, Sui Tianming looked at his phone screen and smiled ominously. 3 days later in the house, across from the main character, Wei Wei sat and asked if he wanted to gather them all there. She crossed her legs and fell silent. Sinan smiled, folded his arms across his chest, and replied that he only needed information, nothing more, and he hoped that they had the information he needed so that he wouldn't have to waste his time on it. Wei Wei clicked her tongue and asked if he really thought it was that simple, because none of the three main characters were willing to share the information they needed with the authorities. The main character smiled and replied that, okay, then there was no need to get distracted. He just needed help with something else. Let her take this thing. check it, and return it to him. He pushed a small white envelope forward and said that, in his opinion, it might contain drugs. Wei Wei quickly jumped up from the sofa and shouted that it was drugs. Sinan replied that there had been a pharmaceutical factory on the Chen family's property that he had seized, but it had recently burned down and there had been casualties. He tried to cover it up as best he could and hoped that the authorities would sweep the case under the rug because he didn't know who was responsible yet. Wei Wei sat down and replied that she would take the powder for analysis, but she didn't know if she would be able to get an answer, as she was not in a very high position. Suddenly, someone shouted that he couldn't pass. The main character in Wei Wei stood up and looked in the direction of the shout. The voice asked indignantly about registration and whether he even knew who he was. Shin held out her hands and said that she was sorry, sir. But by order of the authorities, the hall on the third floor was currently only for awakened guests, and the passage was closed. Zhang Wei pointed at her and shouted that he was already a VIP member, and that wasn't enough. Sunan laughed and said, "Wow, this guy really wants to get through." The guy pushed Qing and asked what he was doing. "Just let him pass, that's all." Qing screamed in pain, and the guy said, "Let's see what they do." Wei Wei lowered her head and said that she would probably go, but maybe she could help him deal with them. The main character winked at her and said, "No, it's okay. It's just that this guy has had it in for him since college." The girl also decides to follow the others. Officer Bai offers his services to the big boss, Shen, to eliminate a small problem. Shen politely declines, citing his unwillingness to disturb such an important person. He insists, mentioning an old personal grudge against this person from their college days. Shen agrees and mockingly hints at the possibility of rekindling an old romance. The big boss strictly forbids killing anyone, after which Bai says goodbye and leaves. A man rudely tries to break in, pushing away the person trying to stop him. A guy nearby approaches the victim, calming her down and taking control of the situation. The guy tries to politely stop the intruder, urging him not to cause trouble. The insolent visitor threateningly declares that he is asking for trouble, and he hits our young man with force. The guy looks at himself and complains of a numb arm after the collision with the scoundrel. The classmate arrogantly shouts about his right to do as he pleases, and kicks him. He knocked him to the ground and began kicking him. A man in white was passing by and wondered if Wei Xiao was involved with someone really influential. The appearance of Shen An causes shock and recognition in one of those present. The intruder asks what he is doing there, and learns that Shen is a big boss. He is whispered to about the events at the Emperor Hotel, which this man had settled. Red continues to be rude, declaring his intention to pass through no matter what. Shen An's security guard is enraged by such disrespect and rushes to attack. The insolent man mocks the guard, demonstrating his icy energy. Shen An calmly grabs his subordinate and tells him to close his eyes and calm down. He continues to tell her to imagine that he is the commander and those around him are his subordinates. Shen An asks him how she would treat these subordinates, whom he calls ants. He comes to realize that he is the king, and everyone around him is just insignificant ants. A mocking question is asked about whether what is happening is some kind of spiritual breakthrough technique. The guy asks contemptuously how a small ant dares to speak in his presence. The insolent visitor tries to shout something, but his words are cut off mid-sentence. The boy notes with surprise that the man has not yet fallen to his knees. There are muffled curses and broken speech, full of humiliation and fear. Finally, after numerous blows, a desperate cry breaks through, demanding that it stop. The bastard is completely broken. He humbly apologizes and admits his mistake. His companion also joins in the apologies, begging Mr. Shen to forgive them. Shen An calmly orders them to be released, and his servant immediately agrees. He turns to the nobodies and tells them they are now free. They hastily leave, and the fortune teller's companion takes one last look at the main character. The future asks Shen An if the awakening of the pressure force is not too hasty. He expresses concern that the young man can now only resist the weak awaken. Shen An counters that Mengzi has been with him for a long time and is not easily influenced by ego. He considers the method of awakening potential to be truly brilliant. Suddenly, someone calls out to him. The old man addresses Shen An, noting that this must be their first official meeting. The unexpected visit begins with an apology for the guest's unannounced intrusion. Another girl's voice interjects with a dissatisfied comment about the need for personal presence and the arrogance of the host. The guest is introduced as Old Man Ji, the leader of the organization, which allows him to speak directly. Old Man Ji laughs and asks if the young Shen has any impressive proposals. Shenin gets to the point, expressing his hope for an exchange of information. The secretary abruptly interrupts the conversation, activating his eyes, and the young man immediately falls under hypnosis. Wei Wei stops him, demanding an explanation for what is happening. She responds calmly, saying she just wanted to show the boy who's boss. The woman is ordered to start dancing right now, and the guy starts dancing. Wei Wei watches this with concern and turns to address her superiors. But at that moment, the secret is getting closer and closer to the main character. And eventually it pounces on her. The girl screams, demanding to be let go as she is lifted up. And then they throw her on the floor. She was shocked. Why did he do that? And the guy replied that he needed a dance partner. The guy warns that mental tricks can backfire on him. The woman is accused of pretending and called a mentalist Du Xin Shui. The future man yells at his subordinate, urging him not to be rude. The girl starts to get very angry when suddenly the old man interrupts them. He apologizes for her impulsiveness and returns the conversation to Shenan's proposal. Shenan reveals his goal of sharing information about the hidden awakened ones with the government. His opponent is skeptical about the value of this data. Shenan describes in detail the abilities of the mentalist Du Xin Shui, including hypnosis and illusions. He adds a sarcastic remark about her poor dancing skills. Old Ji abruptly interrupts him, acknowledging the talent of the young Shen and agreeing to negotiate. Old Ji proposes an exchange of information and asks Shan to investigate the affairs of the remaining three great families. He is confident in the hidden power of the young Shen and hints at a reward for his help, denying that it is a free service. As a gift, Old Ji gives Shan a certain item resembling a treasure map. Shan is curious about the contents of the map and is assured of its value. To seal the deal, Old Ji appoints Wei Mai as Shan's personal assistant. The girl expresses obvious confusion and disagreement with the sudden appointment, but the guy has already started giving her orders. The girl retorts that she will not accept absurd requests, reserving the right to evaluate them herself. The old man agrees and says that he can give her crazy tasks if she wants to do them. The guy was happy, but Wei Mai indignantly asks why no one is interested in her own opinion on the matter. One day later, they were already in the jungle. Shannon showed the map she had received from Old Ji to her new assistant, Bai. She snatched the piece of paper and told him never to call her that again. The guy smirks and reminds her that he is now the boss, and that this decision has been approved by her former boss. She wonders how Shan found out about Du Xin Shu's abilities, which came as a complete surprise. Shan teasingly offers to whisper the answer in her ear, surprising his interlocutor. The young man declares that he has many secrets, but he has no intention of sharing them. Wei Mai shouts furiously that Shan is now dead after his provocative words. Someone loudly demands that Shan stop immediately, but he says that she will never catch up with him. After a while, she catches up and grabs him by his clothes. She loudly protests, asking if the insolent man even knows how to spell the word death. The guy shouted that the handsome man was being killed. Suddenly, a strange monster harpoon flew towards them. Seeing it, he shouted cautiously and pushed the girl away from the blow. And in the end, this tentacle or tongue grabbed his hand. Now the girl ran to his aid because there were more and more tentacles. She fought them off and asked if the guy was okay, who had barely freed himself from these tentacles. The boy was also concerned about the girl's condition, but she assured him that she could handle the problem herself. The girl smiled and declared her invulnerability, comparing herself to Iron Man. And the boy sat down and thought how nice it was to be protected by such a beauty. She took this physical challenge as just a workout and raised her hand to wipe the sweat from her forehead. Suddenly, the guy notices something strange, and the girl asks anxiously what happened. His concern grew, and he asked again if his companion was okay. But after the acid from the tentacles, all of the girl's clothes had dissolved. The girl becomes confused, not understanding what is happening around her, and feels embarrassed. Then she screams loudly throughout the forest. After a while, the guy with the slap mark on his cheek apologizes awkwardly, saying that he accidentally peeked, and the girl puts on his hoodie and asks why all his clothes are so short. They barely cover her butt. Then the guy offers to give her his pants, but the girl, furious, calls him a pervert and demands that he get away from her. She orders him to walk ahead, complaining that her clothes don't even cover her back. They make their way through a bunch more of these tentacles. He chops half of them and simply devours the other half. Soon they reach their destination, and the guy points to the right place. He is amazed to see mutated fruits that give abilities to those who have awakened. The guy is amazed by the amount of fruit, which is enough to create an entire army. The question arises about the true intentions of Old G, who wants to create a counterweight to the families. The girl realizes that such an alliance could be a dangerous double-edged sword. The situation takes a turn for the worse when the heroes realize they are surrounded. A huge pack of evil wolves, and even a couple of gorillas looking down on them from above. The guy expresses doubt about his ability to protect his partner in the upcoming conflict, but the girl says that they cannot harm her. Suddenly, the first wolf from the pack attacks them. The guy immediately cuts it down and asks the girl to leave all the wolves to him. After all, they were now distracted by the main character. He was ready to fight them off with his aura, which quickly took out almost the entire army of wolves and scattered them around the area. Even the monkey was badly hurt and now lay unconscious. But the guy looked in shock at the new pairs of red eyes and thought that there was simply no end to these creatures. He immediately made a decision and grabbed the girl by the hand, saying that there were too many of them and the two of them couldn't handle it. Suddenly, the guy stumbled on the road, and in that very second, they fell into a huge crevice because of the main character's mistake. They crashed hard to the bottom of the crevice, and in such a position that the protagonist immediately felt embarrassed. She was on top. The girl anxiously asked Shen-an if he was okay after the fall. The guy sarcastically asked who would feel good under a piece of metal weighing hundreds of kilograms. The girl got angry and asked who he called a piece of iron. Was he tired of living? But the guy immediately pulled her close to him, which discouraged her. Shen-an orders his companion not to look back and to keep moving forward. The girl tries to understand the meaning of his strange instruction with bewilderment. Her disobedience leads to fear at the sight of a giant centipede, which the guy had anticipated when the girl was already on his head. Shen-an suggests that they first find a way back to the surface, despite the danger. The girl sarcastically compares his jumps to his unsuccessful performance at the Olympic trials. The guy retorts that it's all because of her considerable weight, causing outrage. Shen-an notices the abnormally high gravity and the presence of an invisible barrier in the cave. The guy realizes that his inner voice is silent again, and that he will have to act on his own. He reaches his hand into the portal. He notes the strange reluctance of the arthropods to attack them directly and the need to find a way out. A sudden attack by centipedes forces him to instantly abandon his previous assumptions. Shen-an shouts for his companion to dodge, seeing a threat from the other side as well. The guy tries to calm the girl down, claiming that he has a specific plan of action. He waited until all the bastards approached him and shot them all with fire. Shen-an smells a seductive aroma coming from the mutated fruit. He reasons that it may be necessary to eat them in order to survive, prompting his partner to protest. The guy determines the direction with his ability and finds the source of the strange and alluring smell. The girl begins to feel dizzy and disorientation in the dungeon. She also feels like someone is watching them. Shen-an confirms her fears about her gradual loss of sense of reality and sends his impulse upward, right at a flock of all kinds of animals. The sudden swarm of bats forces the couple to flee, and the guy orders her to stay close to him. And they run forward, away from these bloodsuckers. The guy notices the long-awaited source of light ahead with relief and urges them to speed up. After climbing out of the cave, they find themselves in an unfamiliar place, causing the girl to be confused and blinded by the bright sunlight. Her amazement grows at the sight of a giant grasshopper filling the space around them. Shen-an's inner voice finally appears, calling this place the entrance to the world of demons. The guy clarifies that the real demon world is much scarier than this border area. Shen-an remembers that old G gave him the map and wonders about the man's knowledge. The girl's voice reveals the origin of the map from the hunter who awakened his powers through the fruit. The guy is outraged that the valuable gift turned out to be a useless thing picked up from the ground. This discovery gives Shen an even more reason to doubt old G's true intentions. All this time, a reptile has been watching them. The guy and the girl raise their heads and freeze in shock. The couple encounters a giant butterfly the size of a paraglider and an equally huge squirrel. The girl compares the prehistoric landscape surrounding them to the world of Jurassic Park. An attempt to take a photo fails due to a lack of signal, and the guy warns of the consequences of information leakage. Suddenly, an underground tremor begins, causing the characters to lose their balance. It turns out that all this time they were standing on a huge turtle. The girl is horrified and wonders what the local creatures ate to reach such sizes. She is speechless with shock as she watches the chaos unfolding around them. All the animals begin to run away, and Gigi stands still with the girl. He doesn't understand what has happened here. Suddenly, a huge and terrifying white snake appears before them. It strikes them, and the heroes barely manage to dodge the deadly attack. Shannon eagerly decides to take advantage of the situation to test the limits of his powers. The girl, seeing his gaze, asks him to be careful. An inner voice condemns his recklessness, comparing his attempt to an ant trying to move a tree. But he doesn't have time to stop him, and as soon as he grabs the snake's tail, it throws him far, far away. After landing and getting a huge bump on his head, the main character was also scolded by his future self. The girl panics and checks to see if her partner's alive after such a dangerous stunt. With difficulty regaining consciousness, the guy manages to shout a warning about a new impending threat and saves the girl by jumping away with her from the snake's strike. Now they are running away from its sinister jaws together. The guy asks in despair what they should do now, left alone with the danger. An inner voice coldly states their slim chances of survival in the world of demons. Shannon realizes that running away is useless and decides to look for a way back into the cave. He realizes the enormous risk of being trapped in the confined space of the cave. The boy realizes that there is no other way out and urges his companion to follow him. Grabbing her by the hand, he leads her into the dark cave. Shannon concludes that they must somehow stop the monster rather than simply running away. Inside, they stumble upon an angelic purple glow and freeze. The girl hesitantly shows him an object, hoping it will be effective against the beast. The guy honestly admits that he is not sure of success himself, suggesting they simply wait for the result. 2 hours later, the situation finally stabilizes. Shannon declares that they are temporarily safe and suggests moving on. But when he looks at his partner, he sees only a girl sleeping without a care in the world. The guy couldn't believe that his partner was able to fall asleep in such a dangerous situation. He can only guess whether her nerves are truly made of steel. So he decided not to wake her, but simply picked her up and carried her forward, out of the cave, away from all these tentacles and other junk. Some time passed and Wei Wei slowly began to open her eyes. The guy apologized for waking his companion in the middle of the night. He realizes that they won't be able to get out today and suggests resting. Noticing something strange, Shannon suggested that it might be poisonous gas and advised waiting until morning. In the end, they built a fire, and the guy suggested that the girl get some sleep, and then they would take turns during the night. The next morning, the girl wakes up feeling like she has slept for an indefinite amount of time. She sees that she is sleeping right next to our main character. Suddenly, she was terrified to discover that the giant snake had found their shelter again. It was already preparing to swallow them whole,